For the next 2 hours, you won't chase sleep. Sleep will come to you.
Syllables behave. Vows breathe. Your pulse can learn both.
Here, continuity moves by inches, like anesthesia. We keep time, or time keeps us.
Mercy is a leak we choose to cultivate. No drama, only competence. Some locks learn by listening.
Likeness reassures the city.
Silence wasn't sacred. It was enforced. I remember.
Every ending is a beginning. No matter the darkness, the light asks only one thing of us: continue.
Before we begin, find a quiet place to rest. Let your shoulders drop and let the room settle around you. This is a story for sleep, soft, steady, and unafraid of the dark. Keep your mind open, your questions gentle. If anything feels heavy, let it drift to the edge like candle smoke. Tonight we will listen, not to noise, but to a whisper hidden beneath the bells. When you're ready, breathe in, breathe out, and step with me into a door that was never meant to open. I was a priest once before the hunger, before I understood the shape of silence, before I learned the difference between what is holy and what is merely kept. If you listen closely, you can hear it, even now, in the spaces between my words. The soft breath of the city's dawn, the brass taste of a bell struck somewhere behind the ribs of Rome, the hush that descends on stone when a latch lifts. I remember the way the wood of the booth felt under my fingertips, pale and cool, with an iron band cutting across it like a horizon. They called it the Dawn Confessional, though the sun never touched it. It stood in a corridor that did not map to any corridor you would know, a corridor whose geometry obeyed prayer before it obeyed light. I tended it for years, carrying the keys and not the permission, dusting the carved grapevines and not the answers, polishing the lattice window that separated penitent from priest, although, in that room, I was always both. The first time I saw it, Father Aurelio said, "Do not open that door unless you are told." His hand rested on my shoulder with a weight that implied not affection but calculation, like a paperweight that knew exactly how many pages it pinned. Some doors are so merciful that opening them would kill you. He smiled when he said it, as if smiling could take the edge off the blade. I nodded. I had come to the church because I had a problem with edges, with the way they split the world into food and not food, night and not night. The collar was easier than the mirror. I said the hours. I learned the Latin. I memorized the responses and the names of those who had starved themselves into heaven. The door kept its counsel, and I kept mine. You should know what I was before the keys, but if I say it plainly, you may stop listening, and I need you to listen. The hunger was not the hunger of a poet reaching for a metaphor. It was older, less interested in symbolism than in wrists. I learned to speak softly because teeth have loud reputations. There are monasteries where a vow is a machine you strap to the spirit to make it consistent. I found the church a better machine than any of them. If you pray every hour, you always know what the next minute is for, and that knowledge can save you from yourself. It saved me for years. That is, perhaps, the first thing the clerics understood about me. How desperately I wished to be saved from the shape of my own throat. And yet, there was this door, pale wood, iron band, a keyhole like a pupil. The corridor around it was narrow, in a way that suggested not miserliness but design. The walls sweated quietly in summer and exhaled cool in winter, and the floor bent in obedience to a slope no architect had drawn. Someone had braided a rosary out of iron wire and hung it on a hook to the left of the booth. Each bead was engraved. The words were too small to read and too sharp to touch. The confession grill was fixed, not the sliding lattice I knew from every other booth, but something like a window in a cell, square and unpitying. On the penitent's side, instead of a kneeler, a shallow shelf sat at waist height, and on the shelf a glass plate lay embedded, the size of an open hand, veined with hairline cracks, as if the glass had learned to age, but not to break. I asked what the glass was for. To keep the book from breathing too hard, a sacristan said, then crossed himself, then laughed, as if it had been a joke. The glass hummed when my sleeve brushed it. I knew the sound. The tone of instruments that measure weather in rooms where weather has no business being measured. I knew, too, the smell, dust and oil and something else, something sweet and iron, the smell of a paper cut that has already thought better of bleeding. Vellum takes the scent of centuries differently than paper. It can smell like a barn in winter or a library in morning. This smelled like dried blood. I could not stop thinking about that smell. I did not go looking for it. It always came to me when I was closest to sleep, the way some songs find your ear when you are alone with a window. If you follow a priest through a day, you will discover the extent to which keys are a theology. I learned the drawers first, then the cabinets, then the chests where monstrances slept wrapped in linen, then the iron door to the sacristy tower, then the little trap in the floor that led to a crawl space, that led to a staircase, that led to a landing that, if you squinted, looked like what might become the corridor with the pale door. Not there, Father Aurelio would say. Not yet. And his kindness was so meticulous it could have been an instrument. He made tea as if the water had confessions, and he looked at me as if the world were slightly better for having me in it. It is difficult to ignore a man who deploys gentleness like a tool, who knows the torque of mercy and when to use it. I wanted to be the sort of thing that responded to gentleness. I wanted to be domesticated by a calendar. Whatever else you may think of them, the clerics understood the dignity of my attempt. I remember the first lash of the Holy Whip more clearly than my first Mass. That is not blasphemy, it is anatomy. The handle was carved in such detail that the angels on it appeared about to blink. The cords were pale as linen and darkened like bone where the hand always held them. It was the instrument of correction, reserved for those who used the wrong questions in the right rooms. I had not opened the door. I had only asked why the booth's grill did not slide, and why the glass had veins, and why the corridor's geometry did not match the building's shadow on the ground. There are answers you are allowed to own only after you have been injured by them, Father Aurelio said. He did not lift his voice. He did not raise the whip as if it were a punishment. He raised it as if it were a stylus signing a covenant I had not read. The first strike drew not blood but heat. The second taught me that pain can have grammar. The third explained that the body sometimes learns a lesson more quickly than the mind. I did not cry out. A lash is a sentence, and if you interrupt a sentence, you lose the meaning. Afterward, I stood alone in the sacristy, collar unbuttoned, skin cooling into a lattice of dull flame, and I leaned my forehead against the cabinet's wood and felt how wood keeps secrets. There are trees that hear axes and decide to survive. Cabinets made from their bones inherit a texture that forgives and records at once. I said the hours. I said them without looking at a clock. I said them until the clock sounded like prayer. I slept without moving and woke in the same position, like a page pressed under glass. If you have never been struck for curiosity, the body's obedience after such a lesson might seem dignified. It is not. It is useful. The corridor remained. The door remained. The iron rosary's beads glinted when a candle moved, and sometimes I thought I heard the clicking of a chain beneath the floor, the way a dog's leash will announce the dog's approach before the paws can. I listed the noises of the corridor, the way some men list virtues: wood settling, a bell far away, the breath of someone who had fallen asleep trying not to dream, the whisper of cloth, as the sacristan passed and touched the doorframe with 2 fingers, as if to count himself present. I had never seen anyone enter the booth. I had never heard confession there. And yet, when I brought my ear close to the lattice, I could feel the faintest wind against my skin, as if on the other side were not a room but a field. You will want to know whether I had already done the things that make a man a monster. The honest answer is that I had done them before the collar, and that the collar did not undo them but rather organize them into a quieter shape. There is a reason I do not describe the taste of blood the way the poets do. It is not wine, not iron alone, not the sea. It is attention when attention has nowhere else to go. I fed with care. I fed as little as I could. I learned to live as a line between 2 vows, the vow I had taken aloud and the vow I had taken to myself the night I realized the thirst had become my native language. I am telling you this now, not to ask your pity. Pity is a kind of leash. I am trying to show you the mechanism by which I waited, and how waiting sharpened me. On the morning the door opened, I did not mean to open it. I had come to dust the altars and change the candles and polish the silver, because there is salvation in polishing. It was cool and early, and the basilica still smelled like last night's rain. Somewhere beyond the nave, a pigeon scolded under a stone arch, the way pigeons pretend to own the cities humans build. I walked the narrow way because I always did, because habit is a tool you can deploy against yourself, because I wanted to be the kind of creature who could be predicted by a hallway. The iron beads were cold when I brushed them with my sleeve. The glass hummed. The key at my belt is one of many, but it is the one that always finds its way into my hand when I am not thinking, the way a tongue will always find a cut in the mouth. My fingers knew the keyhole before my eyes did. The key turned. Wood groaned as if relieved, to be honest. The hinge sang a little. Even hinges like to be the subject of a song. Inside, the air moved. That was the first heresy. A booth is a stillness. This booth had weather. The temperature dipped at knee height, rose at shoulder height, the kind of layering you can only find in stairwells and forests at dawn. The seat on the priest's side was polished by years of penitents who had turned into listeners, or listeners into penitents, and a small cushion waited there, impatient as obedience. I sat. The lattice square was darker than the room should have allowed, and the dark had texture, as if somebody had sewn velvet out of breath. I put my ear to the grill. I do not know what I expected. I think I expected a mouse. I think I expected a joke. I heard the sea. Not the sea that tourists eat with their eyes from the edge of a cliff while drinking whatever the guidebook told them to drink. The old sea, the one that used to cover the stone the basilica sits upon, the one that remembers bones without remembering names. The sea of salt and silt. I pressed my hand to the glass plate, not because I believed it would do anything, but because it was there and I was a man with a hand, and the glass was colder than glass knows how to be. It shivered under my palm. Then the second heresy. A breath on my knuckles, not from the gap at the bottom of the booth door. Not from any draft that stone can explain, but from the square itself, as if the lattice were the mouth of a thing that could exhale. You expect fear here. Perhaps you want it. Fear is the plot device of cowards as well as of kings. What I felt was recognition, the way a locked door recognizes a key, the way a word recognizes the mouth that invented it. The world narrowed to a sound I will not borrow metaphors to name. It was not thunder, not a choir, not the crying of metal. It was the sound a wound makes when it remembers itself. And then something else. The stink of tallow, extinguished improperly. The sweet, exact odor of ink that has dried on skin. The whisper of parchment lifted from parchment. If you have never handled a chained book, you cannot know how gravity changes around it. Weight is an emotion in those rooms. Chains do not so much restrain the book as teach you how to approach it. I realized then the glass plate was not embedded in the shelf to protect the wood. It was a lid. Beneath it, a recess the size and shape of a folio waited like a body ready for an autopsy, and the writing etched on the inner edge of the recess was not Latin. I have read what Latin can do when it wants to be a knife. This was older and slower, a system that pretended to be simple the way a serpent pretends to be a line. I know the way certain words taste, because I have had to learn the prayers aloud enough times for them to leave residue, and these left a residue of frost on my tongue just looking at them. When I pressed my fingers against the glass again, the frost bloomed under my fingerprints, tiny ferns of ice unfolding and then thawing, as if the booth inhaled and exhaled through the glass. There are rules that keep men alive. I broke one. I spoke into the lattice. "Bless me, Father," I said, and this was either blasphemy or accuracy, depending on the posture of your soul. For I have waited. The booth listened. Very slowly, the dark beyond the grill acquired depth. What had been a surface became a corridor, and somewhere at the end of it, a light argued with itself about whether to exist. It chose, temporarily, to exist. The light had the color of a page turned in a dim room. The voice that arrived carried the calm fatigue of someone who has said the same thing for centuries and is willing to say it again if you promise to mean it. "How long?" it asked me gently. "Have you been hungry?" Then I was no longer in the corridor that did not map to any corridor. I was in a memory of water. I was standing in a nave built of salt. The pews had barnacles. The altar had a tide line. A pulpit, shaped like a beached boat, pointed its prow toward an organ that breathed without pipes. The floor was ribbed by currents no wind made, and I could feel with the soles of my feet the gentle insistence of the ocean, reminding stone of its first supervisor. The smell was right, which is to say the smell was complicated. Fish and iron and the delicate rot of rope left in the rain. On the wall, where the stations of the cross should have been, a series of images depicted instead the stations of the key. Men and women with torches, a hand writing a name and then closing around it, a mouth sewn shut and then unsewn with a needle made from a thorn. I understood none of it. I understood all of it. The world was a bell, and someone had struck it. Answer, the voice said, and I realized it came not from the grill but from the chair behind me, the chair that had not been there a moment ago, and that now possessed the temper of furniture that has too strong an opinion of its purpose. I turned. The chair was empty but shaped as if a man had just stood up from it, a dip in the cushion, the ghost of movement in the air, the suggestion of heat. The cushion smelled like my own skin after the lash. You will forgive me for the gracelessness of what I felt next. I wanted very much to kneel and to be forgiven. I wanted to be folded back into a story that did not require my invention. Instead, I told the truth. Always, I said, I have always been hungry. I am hungry even when I am praying not to be. I am hungry when I am full of God. The booth liked this. The dark behind the lattice softened the way an audience softens when the speaker finally stops posturing and begins to speak in the language of spine and nerve. I heard again the clicking of a chain below the floor, and then the light moved and the recess under the glass plate sighed. The glass rose a fraction of an inch and settled. When I placed my hand on it again, the frost that bloomed traced the shape of letters I recognized and did not. Names scratched by someone who had thought he would be remembered if only he scratched hard enough. A name I had not said in years lay there, stubborn as a scar. Not the name the church had given me when I promised obedience, not the name I had been called when I lived under a different sky, but the name whispered by the first person I ever fed from without asking permission, the name spoken not in anger but in awe, and then in silence. It hurt to see it. It healed something I had forgotten to grieve. You are not the first, the booth said. I did not ask first what. Men ask the wrong questions when they think they are the only ones to have survived. You are not even the first to be kind. The first to be hungry and kind lived before this place had floors. He fasted for a century and a day, and then he gave up and ate the sun and found it tasted like a scream. He was sorry for a very long time. The lattice breathed. We made this booth for those who are sorry for the right things. What are the right things? I asked. I did not mean to. The question jumped from me as a fish clears water without knowing why. A chain clinked. The iron rosary on the hook outside shivered. Somewhere far off, a door discovered that it had been locked long enough and decided to contribute. Stone experienced regret. This is how sound travels in places like that. Like confession, one mouth at a time. The right things, the voice said, are not the hunger and not its relief. The right things are the hours we steal from others while we wait to declare ourselves harmless. The right things are the versions of history we allow to harden because we are tired. The right thing is the lie you tell your own pulse when you say you have stopped wanting. I have not stopped, I said, and the calm it brought me was obscene. I don't know if you understand the relief of admitting to the air what your body already believes about you. For some, that relief becomes an addiction worse than the vice they name. For me, it was the first honest use of the day. In that honesty, a kind of courage grew. Not the noisy courage of men with swords, but the slow courage of water deciding to wear away a continent by touching it exactly the same way until time becomes a verb. I have not stopped, I said again, and the glass fogged where my breath struck it, and I wrote with my finger on the fog the first letter of that old name, and then I did not write the rest. A letter is a promise, and I am careful with my promises. Then listen, the booth said, And perhaps you think it's strange that furniture has imperatives. But you would be surprised how many things in churches know the difference between imperative and indicative. Listen, because the city is almost awake, and the bells are proud, and they will drown this out if you let them. The door you have opened was not meant for you. It was meant for the story that keeps lying about you. Stories stink when they lie. You can smell them if you are patient. I breathed in. The stink was there. The tang of paint mixed to look like blood. The saccharine perfume of candles meant to smell like lilies but secretly scented with the afterthoughts of factories. The faint sourness of linen that had been starched with the fear of a woman who was not allowed, in her lifetime, to sign her own name. Lies, all of them, made tactile and domestic. "We will not forgive you tonight," the booth said gently. "We will teach you to revolt." This is where you think the miracle will announce itself. Trumpets, light, the echo of a line from Scripture cleverly repurposed to suggest that what I did next was a fulfillment and not a betrayal. I promise you there were no trumpets. There was light, the way there is always light, which is to say, light lost an argument with darkness and went to sulk in a corner. The miracle was pettier and more beautiful than spectacle. The glass plate clicked again, and when it settled I could see that beneath it, the recess now held a book that had not been there before. It did not appear. That is not how appearances worth trusting occur. It arrived the way dew arrives, and then my eyes learned that it had always been there. It was bound in leather, dark as old plums, and stitched with a thread so pale it embarrassed itself. There was no title. There was a scar on the cover, the exact shape of a curved fingernail. If you have ever seen your own hand printed in dust on a table you have just cleaned, you know the combination of shame and satisfaction that scar gave me. I tried the lid. It did not move. The booth waited until I stopped pretending I had strength. "Ask," it said. "You of all creatures know what hunger becomes when it refuses to speak." So I asked, not with words the church had taught me, but with the particular grammar of breath I learned in a different century, on a street that no longer exists. The lid rose a negligible fraction. Sometimes a fraction is enough. I slipped a nail under it and used, at last, the strength I had denied. The glass lifted with the helplessness of surrender. The cold rushed up. The book was heavier than it had any right to be. I lifted it as I would lift a child I had no authority to comfort, and set it on the shelf so that it lay between me and the lattice like a translation. When I opened it, the smell that rose made me dizzy. Vellum remembers environments. This one remembered a room filled with smoke that was not from candles, and a winter whose cold had stopped trying to be gentle. The ink was black the way night is black when it has made a wish. The script did not curl like monks' hands, no patient, pious loops. These letters were angular, efficient, fed on meat and debt. This was a ledger that had taught itself to sing. The first page bore no words. It bore a map, not of a country, but of a sentence, the way some men draft legal documents with diagrams so only the initiated can follow. Lines converged at a dot, labeled in a hand I recognized as the sacristan's. His was the only insignificance that allowed itself to be seen. The dot's label read, "Confession begins where the air is heaviest." I put my palm on that dot. The paper grew warm. I turned the page. Names, not of sinners, not of saints. Names of rooms. Rooms like mine that did not map to the buildings they pretended to belong to. Rooms that rotated like gears. Rooms that opened only when a hunger told the truth about itself. I do not remember sitting back, but I must have. because my spine remonstrated and the cushion sighed. I could feel the lines across my back, where the whip had written its argument into me years earlier, and those lines itched as if the skin were growing a new alphabet. "Who wrote this?" I asked, though I knew the answer would be unsatisfactory. The booth exhaled. "We did," it said, and the "we" did not sound like authority as much as like a choir that had long ago tired of being seen. "We," by which we mean those who keep watch, where keeping watch has been rebranded as disobedience. "We," by which we mean the archivists, who understand that to catalog is to confess. "We," by which we mean the hungers that refuse to be domesticated into miracles. "I shouldn't be here," I said, and the words left a sour film on my teeth. Shame and clarity often share a toothbrush. The booth disagreed with a kindness that did not flatter me. "You are the reason this place was built," it said, "not because you are noble, because you are exact, because you have a mouth that was taught to be careful, because if you touch a page with the wrong intention, the page will live long enough to forgive you and you will break. We are tired of breaking good men by keeping them ignorant." The sentence floated between us like a moth attracted to dangerous lamps. Then the booth did something so human I felt the terrible tenderness of it for hours afterward. It asked me whether I was comfortable. I adjusted the cushion. I placed the book more squarely. I wiped a fingerprint from the glass without meaning to. "Begin," the booth said, and I began, not with the first word of a prayer, but with my own name, the one that tastes of iron, and a street that was paved in something that is no longer legal to pave with. If this were a different sort of story, I would tell you the door slammed then, or the corridor uncoiled like a serpent, or a bell collapsed, and someone ran and candles fell over and burned a hole in the floor in the shape of a prophecy. None of that happened. The corridor stayed exactly itself, which is to say it remained narrower than a lie and wider than a habit. The door stood obediently open. The iron rosary looked bored. I turned another page. The ledger's ink glistened briefly where a drop of condensation had fallen, and in the glisten I saw "Do not ask me how" the reflection of a whip handle held by a man whose gentleness made the instrument worse. "You were not wrong to hit me," I told the absent presence of Father Aurelio, though perhaps I was lying to be generous to him. "You were doing the job you agreed to do. I am doing the job I claim was given to me." The booth approved by becoming slightly warmer. Rooms approve with temperature the way people do with a hand on the shoulder. I read until the bells grew jealous. The city began to wake. Somewhere a truck coughed sparks into an alley. A woman scolded a child softly because softness is a form of courage. The book described mechanisms for moving hours the way a careful thief might move jewels, one at a time, in a pocket sewn behind a pocket. It described a way to freeze the flavor of a rumor at dawn so that when it was released at noon it would taste like remembering. It described names erased from calendars and written instead on the inside of bells where only vibration could read them. It described forgiveness as an instrument, and guilt as a currency, and history as a garden pruned at night. I thought of the lash. I thought of the corridor that didn't fit the building. I thought of my own mouth applied to the wrong throat in the right year, and how quietly a person can become a story other people are not allowed to know. I do not know what sound my heart made then. It was not a decision. Decisions are loud. It was an acceptance of a map. The hinge of the day shifted. The light behind the lattice considered its options. "Will you come back?" the booth asked. Or will you commit the common sin of surviving by ignorance? I closed the book, and my hands shook in a way only my hands noticed. I will come back, I said, and the fact that I meant it made me twice as afraid as if I had lied. I placed the ledger back in its recess. The glass settled with the reluctant relief of a confession that has not yet learned the habit of being told. I stood. The cushion inhaled the absences I left behind. I touched the iron rosary and felt how cold iron can be even when the day warms. I locked the door because the opposite of faith is not doubt. It is carelessness. The key came free as if grateful for the exercise. I slid it onto the ring and the ring onto my belt, and my belt around my waist and my waist into the day. I tell you this because the door that never opened, and when it did not swallow me or save me or decorate me with visions. It asked me to learn the weight of my own wanting and to carry it into a room where wanting has to speak in complete sentences. If you require a miracle, consider this. I left a room that contained a book that contained my name in a script I had not taught it, and the sun, which I had not consulted, chose, that morning, to be kinder than it had any reason to be. I walked out into a city that would, in an hour, be loud enough to drown the memory of the sea. I was still a priest, if you looked only at the collar. I was still hungry, if you looked only at the mouth. But if you listened to the hinge, to the glass, to the way the iron beads quietly tapped each other like teeth, you would have heard a door closing behind me without regret. And if you had followed me down the corridor that did not fit the building into halls that believe questions are errors, you might have noticed that I had learned, at last, the exact size of the silence I had been trying to live inside. It was smaller than the booth. It was smaller than my breath. I could carry it with one hand. I did. I returned the next night with the kind of resolve that feels like obedience from the outside and like relapse from the inside. You let the stone decide whether to hold you. These stones were good at their job. We called the descent the gentle way, because the other stair muted the world too quickly, and men who go from noise to hush in an instant are prone to mistakes. The gentle way teaches you by inches that you are a visitor to the belly of a beast that is older than any creed. You accept the slow language of cold. You let candle smell replace street smell. You trade the gossip of pigeons for the philosophy of dripping water. By the 10th landing, your lungs forget the city's shape. By the 12th, your pulse stops believing in weather. By the 13th, you begin to hear pages moving themselves. We called it the exorcist's library, though it was not a library the way the world understands the word. Libraries are built on trust. This place was built on treaties. Shelves rose along the walls like ribs reinforced with iron. Chains lay coiled like polite serpents. Desks wore scorch marks like epaulets. The first rule is that you never turn your back on a chained book. The second is that you never let it pity you. Pity is the mechanism by which bindings slip. I had a badge for the outer aisles, a loop of stamped copper that meant I could touch what had been cured of temper. The inner aisles where the chained books kept their lids and their grudges belonged to the men with gloves that looked like they had been sewn from the night sky. A novice passed me with a bundle of vellum wrapped in cloth. He nodded the way a man nods at his own funeral, respectful, unsurprised. "Cold tonight," he said. We say things like that in these rooms, so that our mouths remember courtesy. Otherwise, we begin to speak only in catalog numbers and alarms. "Colder upstairs," I said, and he grimaced with the shared humor of those who know that the most dangerous chill is the kind administered by polite men in daylight. He vanished between shelves that wore little iron rosaries instead of shelf labels. I stood at the threshold and let the place take my measure. If you have never held vellum that has learned the habits of the thing it contains, you cannot know the texture of thought when it becomes animal. Some folios grow warm when you approach. Others cool the room by degrees until your breath files itself in a ledger only they can read. Some leak ink back into the quill as if ashamed of what they once said. Some refuse to open unless you speak the wrong prayer, wrong meaning not heretical but misfit, as a shoe may be wrong for a foot that never learned to trust leather. That first night I worked among the obedient volumes. Trial records scorched at the edges, margin notes where the scribe's hand shook after the third hour of an exorcism, inventories of amulets confiscated from midwives with calluses like courage. I copied, I catalogued, I replaced, and every replacement was a negotiation. A book is a person with fewer excuses. At the center of the room, sunken by a single shallow step so subtle you'd miss it if you didn't watch your own ankles, the relic engine turned. You would expect something shaped like a heart or a wheel. It was shaped like a question. Imagine a lattice of reliquaries, finger bones in glass, splinters in brass, a wafer of fabric so old its thread counted the centuries by learning not to fray, arranged in a helical track. Now imagine that the helical track moves not by gear or weight but by attention. We knelt around it in shifts, whispering the hours. With each response the track budged, the reliquaries advanced with the solemn dignity of processions, and the entire contrivance breathed. Father Aurelio called it the liturgical flywheel. He would lay a hand on the casing as if taking a pulse and declare, "Steady, the world can have another day." It is a dangerous thing to give men the sensation of saving everyone with a whisper. The first time I saw the engine stall was the first time I doubted that prayer alone moved it. A brother had fainted, the chant tottered, the chorus lost its spine, and the track shuddered like a bird that has flown into a pane of glass. The room leaned. That is the best way to describe it. The entire chamber inclined as if the earth had made a discreet decision about us. A lamp hissed. The chain of a nearby folio quivered as if excited. In the corner, a reliquary shaped like a tiny sun blinked. I found my voice in the pit of the throat where hungers keep their echoes and sang the line the others had forgotten. The engine resumed the way a man resumes a conversation after deciding not to confess. Later, washing my hands in the brass basin streaked with candle soot, I asked Father Aurelio whether we had nearly hurt the day. "Hurt is not the right word," he said, drying the basin rim with the tail of his robe. "We nearly succeeded too soon. On the fourth night I earned the right to carry a lamp into the Atlas Bay, a cul-de-sac of shelves where the maps behind Scripture were kept. You will think I am speaking figuratively. I am not. There were Bibles unbound and rebound with glass leaves between certain pages. When you breathe on the glass, dew appears guided by oil and ash, and the persuasions of a dead cartographer revealing coastlines where no sea now claims right of way, armies marching through cities that later insisted they had been spared, the long umbilical rivers that fed empires which now deny they were ever infants. On some, tiny red wells bloom where battlefields have tried to cauterize themselves. On others, thin golden threads show the roots of pilgrimages that never ended because the destination was slipped one town over in the calendar. I leaned close to 1 Luke 3. an innocuous genealogy tasked with being dull on purpose and watched as breath fog haloed the family tree, then condensed into a river that ran sideways across the column, pooling in the margin where a saint no longer recognized by the calendar was sketched with 2 lines and a circle for a head. The river curved into a bay that had once existed just long enough to receive a fleet. The fleet had been burned. The bay had been renamed a meadow. Cows feed on the cinders of ships until somebody remembers the smell and says it was always grass. Cartography is a tense, Father Aurelio said behind me, pleasantly, the way one might offer a second cup of tea. We conjugate land until it behaves. He lifted the corner of the page and tapped the glass. The dew retreated like a thought that has been caught in a lie. There were other documents in Atlas Bay that did not want to be maps, and so taught themselves to be stars. A manuscript labeled Des Spheres bore a superimposed astronomy, an upside-down sky that mirrored the star. Well, I would later come to love and dread. If you stared too long, the lights moved in ways that could not be squared with any planet's patience. Stand back, and you saw instead the floor plan of a basilica that had never been built in our world, but inexplicably matched the acoustics of one that had. We filed that sheet under useful threats. I learned the handwriting of archivists who preferred to warn with humor. Another hand, drier, wrote, "Do not breathe here." The corner of that leaf was stained, the color of candle ends pressed into linen by fingers that shook. Not all the paper in Atlas Bay was ancient. We kept copies of pamphlets printed last month, sermons that had outrun themselves, diagrams of instruments rumored by newspapers that breathe faster than truth. Men underestimate the velocity of lies. They also underestimate the stamina of paper. One shelf kept nothing but redactions, pages where a name used to be allowed. The names were scraped with a blade so sharp the strokes made no sound. When you tilt such a page toward a lamp, you see scales instead of letters, a reptile where a saint used to be. I learned to trace the ridges like a blind man reading a history that does not consent to be written aloud. On one such page, I felt the initial of a pope that you will never read about, and beneath it the faint, stubborn grove left by a hand that could not stop writing a calendar it had been forbidden to complete. We spoke to each other quietly, my brothers and I, but the library always listened more loudly. At intervals, a bell behind the wall would strike a single low note to remind everyone that confession is a schedule as much as a sacrament. Between those notes, 100 smaller sounds made the grammar of our hours. A quill refusing a letter, the soft clack of an iron bead rolled on a ledger's margin, a scribe's sigh at the end of a column when he remembers that the next column is longer. Our humor was good because it was thin. If the devil came to file a request, said Brother Matteo once, massaging ink into a stubborn nib, he'd have to wait for a stamp. He would bring his own, Sister Verena said without looking up. She wore gloves made of something that disliked being named. The fingertips were stained the color of violets after rain. She filed the hard things. She did not wave. It was Sister Verena who first trusted me with a chained gospel. "I need a second pair of hands," she said, which in the library is kin to a marriage proposal. We set the folio on its cradle wood, smoothed by a century of liturgical elbows, and laid the chain across our wrists, so that the book, feeling it had won, would stop resisting. The chain was not heavy. Weight is only one of the styles control can wear. The gospel claimed to be Mark, but contained, between Mark's words, someone else's record of the same day, the same footsteps, the same bread, broken for mouths with the same bewilderment. Only the margins were crowded with recipes, not for food, for miracles reduced to instructions. Steep 5 minutes. Hold it breath, stir with psalm. It made my skin feel like it had been lifted a fraction of an inch from the meat and then set back down. Who wrote these? I asked. People who loved the right person and the wrong method, she said. People who wanted to keep light in a jar. She showed me how to turn a page without startling it. We read until the chain warmed. I should tell you about the index room, though I hated it and it knew. A clerk sits there beneath a curtain of iron beads and enters into a book whose paper is so thick it develops tides. He records absences, statues whose hands have been altered to point at the new theology, churches that claim never to have housed a woman who built them with her inheritance, families rewritten so that a son becomes a cousin when a certain contract must look less intimate. The clerk asks no questions aloud. He says them under his breath, where they will not cause accidents. By whose order? On what night? Who watched? He writes the answers whether he receives them or not, because the discipline of such rooms is that the act of writing is a net. Sometimes nets catch fish that aren't there because fish invented the idea of being caught. Why count what isn't? I asked, stupid and tired. Because absence organizes itself, he said without malice. If we do not ruin its schedule, it will keep excellent hours. I bring you now to the vault of instruments, because you will have guessed it exists, and because leaving it out would be a sin against proportionality. You expect swords. There were swords too many, too shiny, taken from men who believed metal could end argument. But the vault cherished other shapes. An astrolabe with teeth so small, you imagine angels might catch their fingers. A crystal bell mounted on a stem of bone that looked like the heart's earliest idea of a ladder. A wooden mallet etched with psalms in a script so childish it must have once been used to teach a frightened novice that sound can be loyal. There were flasks labeled not with ingredients but with verbs. Remember, blur, reverse, witness. Alchemy is just grammar for things that cannot be politely conjugated, Father Aurelio said. He turned the crystal bell a quarter inch. The entire room felt its ribs loosen. Do not ring that, I said. He smiled. I did. Ezer, we did not wear the instruments unless the index told us a name was about to fall out of the world. When that happened, we dressed as carefully as men undress the dead. Sister Verena set the bell in the crook of her elbow. Brother Matteo wore the mallet in a looped strap across his spine. I took the astrolabe because I had good wrists. We went up to the chapel with the ceiling like an obedient sky and stood among the blue-painted saints who had been taught to keep their eyes modestly down. A boy lay on the steps. He was not dying. He was vanishing, fading at the cuffs inward, the way a page loses its corners when too many thumbs have been desperate. Name? Sister Verena asked. The mother spoke it, then corrected herself, then offered a middle name as if names were stones to be thrown until the pond remembered the boy's weight. I set the astrolabe against his chest. It clicked. The mother flinched. The boy sighed, or the room did. We rang the bell once, not for sound but for vibration. Names are tuning forks. The mallet struck the floor exactly once, in a part of the room where the dust understood discipline. The name adhered. The boy returned like a picture that refuses to be badly printed. He cried without noise. The mother kissed the floor. which is a grateful mistake. Floors are notoriously vain. We slept between shifts on pallets that smelled like paper and cobwebs that had learned to be discreet. Sleep here is a negotiation with your ears. The body lies down. The hearing stays up, filing, sorting, counting the number of pages turned by unknown hands, the number of quills discarded by tired wrists, the number of quiets that are not quite silence. In one such almost sleep, I listened to the engine turning and realized there was a counterbeat beneath it, another machine, somewhere deeper, operating on an older schedule. I dressed without thinking and followed the counterbeat the way a sailor follows a current, by leaning his shoulders and seeing which wind agrees with his bones. Down a corridor that had never claimed to be straight, through a doorway with a lintel cut not by mason's chisel, but by recitation, into a chamber so perfectly round the air forgot how to cling to corners. A staircase led downward along the curve of the wall. At the bottom, a well. Not water. Stars. The star well hung its upside-down heaven beneath the Vatican's official sky, the way the moon keeps a second face it shows only to water. Polished brass plates lined the inner shaft. Tiny lenses or eyes, if you're tired, studded the curve. I stood at the lip and saw constellations rise from blackness like schools of fish trained to obey a different ocean. The steps had little brass plaques at intervals with dates engraved so precisely they tasted of a watchmaker's spit. At October 5, the air remembered a calendar correction. At October 14, it remembered the missing days. At October 15, it remembered men in hats, insisting the morning was merciful. The plates were warm, where past hands had insisted on touching the dates, cool where history knew it had been ignored. I set my palm on October 10 and felt the mild grief of a day that never learned its own chores. Father Aurelio found me and did not scold. He was the sort of man who could make forgiveness feel like surveillance and kindness like calibration. "Calendars are cages," he said, and I remembered how lightly he had once lifted the holy whip, the way a composer lifts a baton. People do not understand that cages protect the inside as carefully as they keep out the claw. We remove days because we need someplace to store what won't obey. He pointed with his chin, rather than his hand at a plate installed slightly crooked, as if the room had been drunk when it accepted the gift. "What do you store there?" I asked. "Mornings," he said. "Too many at once are dangerous. Dawn is a ration." He watched my face the way one watches a sea for the first hint of a storm that won't mind being named. When he left, I sat on the step at October 4 and listened to absence learn to speak. This is not poetry. If you sit where a day used to be, the air remembers. It hums in the key of almost. The body recognizes it the way a wound recognizes weather. I thought of the boy who had nearly been forgotten by his own future, of the margins where a name had been scraped to scales, of the glass plate in the Dawn Confessional, and my own old name rising from frost like a leaf skeleton. I understood in a small way that the work below the basilica was not about power dressed as piety. It was about inventory, a terrible, meticulous inventory kept by people who loved order too much to let chaos keep it. But love has habits. Habits harden into control. Control, in certain rooms, enforces silence and calls it devotion. Days passed in this double fashion above, helping the living to name themselves. Below, helping the dead to stop being diagrams. I memorized the catalog of prohibitions, not because I am obedient, but because I am efficient when I plan to disobey. Do not align the exorcist's chorale with the Starwell's perigee. Do not open two chained gospels to pages whose margins share an author. Do not ring the crystal bell when the engine is reversing for feast days. Do not, under any circumstance, carry a mirror into Atlas Bay. Maps despise mirrors. The last time someone did, a coastline developed teeth and bit a novice who'd mistaken an inlet for a mercy. I obeyed each until the night the index clerk touched his temple, left a brown thumbprint there by accident, and told me, without looking, that a saint's name had just left the calendar of 3 neighboring parishes simultaneously. Which saint? I asked. The one who sows questions, he said. We have many of those, I said. He almost smiled. Yes. We dressed in instrument and discipline and climbed. The chapel had visitors' sleeping candles, a confessional that was not mine, a fresco whose eyes met mine and did not blink. We took our places as if we had rehearsed for years because we had. Sister Verena held the bell sideways, a posture that denies sound and insists on tone. Brother Matteo positioned the mallet above the flagstone where important dust lives. I tuned the astrolabe against my own breastbone until the teeth recognized a rhythm they would not betray. We did not say the saint's name. We spelled it with motion. We posed it with posture. Verena tilted the bell 3 degrees. Matteo brought the mallet down without force and let the stone decide how much to return. I turned the astrolabe until the tiny dogs and suns etched around its rim stopped chasing each other and settled into a common boredom. When we finished, the fresco's eyes had moved a fraction nearer the place where a farmer once swore he saw his daughter saved from a fever by a stranger with mud on her hem. The parish register's ink, which had been fading, blushed. Outside, a cart rolled over a rut and did not break. I slept afterward as one sleeps when the body is a museum and the exhibits are tired of being admired. If you are impatient for the sin, forgive me. The library itself commits the first sin every time it decides to keep. You can call it preservation, you can call it worship. I would later learn to call it by its true name, choice. Choice is dangerous when it is this quiet, this competent, this sure of its own benevolence. My sin was smaller and gaudier. I stole a key. You must understand that keys in the library are like pronunciations. Each one opens a vowel in a room that pretends to be consonants. The key I took was the sort good men do not notice because it looks like a spare, stamped in the soft brass used for mistakes. It lived on a ring on a hook in a shadow. Even shadows learn to pretend they are accidental. I took it because my hand wanted to know what my mouth had promised in the Dawn Confessional, that I would not be a domesticated hunger. I wore it on a string under my shirt. It warmed to the skin the way a secret purrs. I carried it for 6 nights before I used it, and in those 6 nights I learned the faces people make when they suspect a room has grown larger without witnesses. The sacristan pinched the bridge of his nose, as if surprised by his own debts. Sister Verena counted respirations aloud when she thought no one listened. Father Aurelio hummed to the engine and placed, now and then, 2 fingers on the casing as if taking an oath in a language that refuses to be printed. On the 7th night, the key told me where to take it. Don't flinch at that sentence. Matter is obedient to habit, and secrets have learned to position themselves in the palm like ambitions. The door the key wanted was not in the library. It was beyond the last shelf, down a short hall that ends if you are meek in a wall. If you press the jamb on the left with 3 knuckles, the wall remembers a time it was only a curtain, and a seam appears. If you convince your shoulders to behave, you can fit through the seam without widening it. The key slid into a slot that knew the taste of such metal. I was in another catacomb, this one newer, which is worse. Old rooms, at least, know how to be ashamed. The ceiling was low enough to keep a man honest. On either side, cabinets with glass fronts held more modern artifacts, negatives of photographs, magnetic tape, rolled microfilm, all labeled as if the man who labeled them had trusted the day to be small forever. A bank of switches slept on a panel the color of olive pits. A smell rose, the first smell in weeks, that had no patience in it. Ozone, sweet and impatient, the scent of storms that prefer wires to clouds. On a table in the center lay a pair of headphones as big as a man's 2 cupped hands, and beside them a binder with a title stamped so hard the letters had left a bruise on the cover. Index of Unremembering Audio. My mouth flooded with the brine that comes when the body thinks a tooth has been broken. You have never known panic if you have not stood in a room where forgetting is recorded as sound. I did not sit. I did not flee. I lifted the binder and read the first page because reading is the only religion I understand. Protocol. When a name is removed from a parish calendar, capture residual resonance via microphone array at the moment of removal. Transcribe waveform into notation. Assign shelf tone. Lodge in vault. Schedule bleed. Back on feast day appropriate to skill or mercy of removed subject. There was an example. A girl whose school had replaced her name on the honor roll with a generic title, exemplary pupil, because the town preferred to forget that she had built the science lab with prize money earned in a contest that made the mayor's son look foolish. The shelf tone of her name hummed in D minor. They bled it back into Christmas morning crowd noise 3 years later. Everyone in town cried at a carol for reasons that would not stand trial. "This is redemption," I said aloud to the empty air, and the air answered with the smallest sound furniture can make when it disapproves of your moral vocabulary. I put on the headphones. I closed my eyes. The first erasure rose from the cups like heat. A saint of midwives struck from a border province's litany when a new bishop had decided steel was cleaner than hands. The sound was not crying. It was fabric torn once, expertly, followed by the silence of a room deciding to agree with the strongest man in it. Then the bleed back. 20 years later, a birth during a thunderstorm, the candle refusing to cooperate, a baby arriving sideways, and then not dying. The mother never told the priest why she kept the child's second name. She had no language for the tone we store under stone. I took off the headphones because I am not the sort of creature who can listen to forgiveness without wanting to bite it. From the far corner came the counterbeat again, the older machine I had recognized under the relic engine's conscience. A door stood there, not wood, steel, painted the color of gum-chewed past sweetness. A window cut into it showed a room with a single chair and a box on a pedestal with a wire leading to a plate on the wall. There are rooms that exist to remove excuses from men. This was one. My stolen key had no authority here. The lock wanted a voice. "Open," I said, and my voice tried to oblige, but the room's taste for obedience did not recognize someone who had eaten as I have eaten. Another voice would be required, one that had grown up at the right altar, believed the right weather, kissed the right rings. I thought of Father Aurelio and felt something ugly unravel in my chest. Not hatred. Hatred is more honest than that. I felt strategy. I left the vault without apology. The gentle way climbed me. I used the outer stair because sleep can be an enemy. I needed people and noise to sand my mind back to proportions I could carry. In the refectory, a kettle boiled with its usual belligerence. Brother Matteo whispered multiplication tables to keep from praying when he was angry. Sister Verena counted chairs as if chairs were a litany of small promises. Father Aurelio drank something dark that was not wine and looked at me over the rim of his cup with the mild interest of a man watching whether he has already guessed correctly. "You are further in than your badge," he said. "You are kinder than your hunger," I said. He set the cup down like a chessman. "Kindness is how we hold the mask on," he said. "It is not the face." "Take me to the chair," I said, because sometimes confession is not about sins, but about asking the right enemy, the right favor. He did not say, "Which chair?" He stood. We walked in the proper order, badges visible, eyes down when the corridor required humility. When we reached the steel door, he placed his hand against the sheet metal jamb and whispered. The door decided to honor his childhood. The room smelled like metal that has memorized a storm. "What is this?" I asked, and he said, "An amplifier." "Of what?" I asked. "Decisions," he said, not unkindly. "We sit here when we must choose which truths to service." He let me sit. The chair was ordinary, which is the worst kind. The box on the pedestal had a dial the size of a small heart. The wire ran to a plate that almost looked like a mirror and pretended not to be one. "Say a name," Father Aurelio said softly. "A true one," I said, mine the old one, the one I had announced to the Dawn Confessional with breath on cold glass, and the plate tightened the air around it like a drum accepting tension. "Good," he said. "Now say a date." I said the date of my first Mass because pain makes poor arithmetic. The dial ticked. I felt the room adjust its valuation of me, as if I had handed in a purse, and the treasurer were weighing coins, counting the scratches on their faces. "Every decision leaves resonance," he said. "Libraries used to bind decisions in leather. We found sound kinder. Sound can be diluted. Leather always wants to crack." He placed his palm flat on the box and closed his eyes, the way a man blesses a child too tired to argue. "What decision do you want to hear?" he asked. The room went quiet in the way that means noisy things are leaning in. "I want to hear the choice you made about me," I said. "The day you learned what I am." He did not smile. "He is better than that." He turned the dial as if selecting a century. The plate shivered. The room replayed the moment the sacristan had sent word that a hunger in a collar had kept the engine from stalling. I listened to Father Aurelio's voice, younger by a winter, saying, "Good, leave him where he can do no harm until we need him to harm the right thing." It is one form of love, that sentence. I felt the lash of it more cleanly than I had felt the holy whip. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. There is a relief in learning that your life is the answer to a question someone asked with care, even if you have no fondness for the question. He adjusted the dial. "Do you understand now the dignity of keeping?" he asked. "We keep so that harm can be assigned intelligently." I wanted to say, "You keep so that curiosity can be taxed," but I had learned the price of sentence-making, and my back still wore the invoice. When we left the chair, the library was awake in the way rooms are awake when they have decided to use you. Sister Verena met us at the threshold, the bell tucked under her arm. A cluster, she said. 3 names, same route, same parish, same hour. We climbed out of habit. We rang out of discipline. We tuned because tuning is what stands between the world and the world's excuses. As we worked, a girl in the back pew freckled. The kind of freckles that look like flour after bread is punched down, watched us with unworried attention. Later, when the names had settled and the dust had agreed to stay where it was placed, she approached me as if speaking to a man in a long hallway. "Father," she said, "can I borrow a question?" "Which one?" I asked. And she said, "The one that asks why the holy things feel like locks." I looked at the bell. I looked at my hands. I looked at Father Aurelio, who watched me the way a physician watches a fever break. "Yes," I said, "but return it." That night, back in the library, the relic engine stalled again. Not for long this time. Long enough to make the room remember being a boat, short enough to call it a cough. I laid my palm against the casing and spoke to it in the way I once spoke to throats that did not want to give up their blood. "Easy," I said. "We are not the only lungs." The engine resumed reluctantly. In its hum, layered like the sound of bees in a field no map admits is a field, I heard the old counterbeat the thing under the thing counting. Not days, not prayers, excuses. The machine beneath the machine was measuring how many times we had explained a theft by calling it custody. Above us the basilica turned in its sleep and dreamed of frescoes holding their breath. In Atlas Bay, a glass leaf fogged and cleared in the absence of any mouth. In the index room a clerk wrote unknown, unknown in the line where he had been trained to sow fiction and did not trouble to lie more beautifully. In the chair room a dial ticked twice with no hand on it and then resolved into the key of almost. And in my collar, against my throat, the old name rested like a coin I refused to spend. I did not go to the Dawn Confessional. Not yet. I stood in the library, among paper that behaved like disciplined animals in chains that pretended to be jewelry, and understood that the layers we peeled were not onion skins but calendars. We were not uncovering truth. We were rearranging rooms so that truth, when it chose to arrive, would find the chairs in a posture that suggested welcome. It is fashionable, if you grow up among vows, to pretend you do not love the people who engineer your days. I loved them. I loved their precision, their tender impatience, the way Sister Verena adjusted a bell's angle, the way a mother adjusts a crown made of paper. I loved Brother Mateo's multiplication when the hour wanted to become a knife. I loved, against my wiser senses, Father Aurelio's confidence that harm could be disciplined into usefulness. I loved them all, and love in rooms like this is just another instrument. It chimes. It keeps time. It can be turned to make a door open or close. And if love is a key, then hunger is a lock. Not the kind that keeps a thing in or out, but the kind that teaches a hand how to turn. When at last I climbed back to the corridor that refuses to be measured, the iron rosary tapped against the door frame, as if it had learned my gait. The glass plate in the Dawn Confessional held its frost like a mouth about to speak. I did not open the door. I placed my palm on the glass, felt the cold bloom into the shape of a letter, and left it uncompleted. There is a discipline in unfinished names. They are bridges the dark is forced to complete on your behalf. I breathed once, twice, in the rhythm we use when we cradle the astrolabe and coax a name back into its neighborhood. Somewhere far below, the engine turned obediently. Somewhere further yet, The older machine counted in a meter that does not flatter men. I withdrew my hand and climbed to the world, which wore its daylight like a justification. The bells were about to claim the morning. The city would wake. Paper would yawn. Chains would loosen politely and retighten with the practiced intimacy of old marriage. I tasted iron and understood that the day was not a thing we earned with prayer. It was a permission we took turns granting one another, which means it can be revoked. Tomorrow, I promised the corridor. Tomorrow I open the door and ask the room to tell me not that I am forgiven, but that I am accurate. And the corridor, being what it is, patient, angular, unseduced, said nothing at all, which is how catacombs approve. Thinking, I did not stumble into the Starwell by accident. I courted it the way a thirsty man courts a quarrel with rain. The library had taught me to hear machines under machines. The chair had taught me that decisions keep their own echoes. The index taught me that absences keep calendars better than priests do. All of that felt like preparation the night I found the stair behind the stair, the one that didn't bother pretending to be secret because it had already persuaded secrecy to be polite. The official observatory above is for photographs and donors and the kind of astronomers who like their heavens well behaved. The observatory beneath the observatory is for men who understand that the sky has two faces and a habit of answering questions you intended for Earth. The stair hugged a perfect circle. Polished brass studs marked each step with a date so precisely engraved the numbers tasted of watchmaker's spit. These studs kept 3 calendars at once, the world's, Rome's, and a third that belonged to whatever slept below. I trailed my fingers over October 4, warm with old hands in October 15, cool as a truth someone is about to deny, and felt therein the ghost of days we had pretended to delete. The well opened, not down but inward. Imagine a shaft lined with faceted plates of brass and black glass, each plate cut to catch light that should not exist in a hole. From the rim you look down and see up constellations rising from a basin of darkness, as if the ocean had been taught to imitate the firmament with obedient clockwork fish. The air was saltless and sharp. It felt like inhaling a decision. Lenses studded the walls at irregular intervals. Some bloomed faintly like watchful eyes, others slept. In the quiet, the world's loudest thing was the tick. That isn't a tick. The soft mechanical syllable you hear with your bones when a system, older than arithmetic, clears its throat. Father Aurelio's shadow preceded his voice. "Careful with your reverence," he said, as if greeting a child whose pockets bulged with rocks stolen from a shrine. "It makes liars of instruments." He did not ask how I had come. Permissions in this depth are useless if you have the right stomach. He stood beside me at the lip and did what he always did to make terror look like pedagogy. He began to name. "The calendar is not a record," he said. "It is a cage." His palm hovered above a brass plate etched with a line of teeth, minute steps in a gear that circled the shaft like the seam of a barrel. With the pad of a finger, he touched a tooth engraved with MDL XXX, then a tooth engraved with 1,699, 1,700, then a tooth that refused to accept any number at all. What we call reform is a redistribution of mourning. A correction on paper is an arithmetic of dawns. Too many dawns at once and men go mad. Too few, and crops decide to disbelieve the sun. We keep balance here. He pointed to a narrow slot just below waist height, no wider than a coin cut into the inner wall. It ran like a canal around the circumference, disappearing into the dark and returning, a seamless track you would miss if you weren't looking for ways the world launders its hours. The Phantom-Time Canal, he said. Years slide here. We store them like oil and spend them when the world pretends to have its reasons. He flicked a chalked scale on the rim. Days withheld, days advanced. The needle twitched in the middle, the way a vein does when the skin above it is ashamed. We do not create time, he said, and something in him preened at that virtue. We rearrange its locations. Below, the constellations shifted with the indifference of gods who have already eaten their priests. Except they weren't gods, and it wasn't the sky. Stars in the star well are indexes, light borrowed from city lamps a mile away, starlight delayed in glass, candle fire trained with lenses, and the whole apparatus hums because attention makes heat. Father Aurelio lifted a brass lever set waist-high into the wall. It clicked with the intimacy of a confession. "Watch," he said. The great engine below the library, the relic engine, kept a slow pulse, like the breathing of a sleeping animal. As Aurelio moved the lever, the pulse synced to a second heartbeat, older and nearer. The constellations accelerated, then slowed, as if persuaded and then scolded. Lines of light that had looked random resolved into the floor plan of a basilica I did not recognize, then into a clock face with no hands, then into a river map that refused to match any book I had ever stolen minutes to read. "We do not ask the sky to obey," he said. "We show it what obedience looks like, and let it choose not to make us correct it. And if it refuses?" My voice was quiet, the way a man lowers his tone near a sleeping child because memory keeps its fists balled. "Then we get weather," he said, and the way he said weather made it sound like a punishment angels invent for rude engineers. A narrow balcony circled the well, a third of the way down. He led me along the stair to that landing, stopping at plaques that asked to be touched. Nicaea, the metal, was hot. Argument has a temperature. Trent, cool and methodical. October 1, 582. The air trembled the way a lie does when it finally receives its official seal. He rested 2 fingers on October 10, a date missing from somewhere else, and shut his eyes. "A postponed morning does not vanish," he said. "It waits for an instrument. Instruments live here." I saw them then nested alcoves set into the round, each containing something between astrolabe and ciborium, brass and glass and bone, wheel-toothed and string-hung, devices that could be called compasses if compasses had ever admitted they were priests. One wore a crown of angelic sigils etched into clear crystal. Another had a mouth like a shell. A third wore a hood as if its light embarrassed it. Labels in a tidy, unlovely hand read, "Migrations, Tithes, Cathedrae." A case sat open with a tool taken out. Its label read, "Memory Tax." Empty hooks are accusations. I felt scolded by a box. "You weren't wrong," Aurelio said, "because my face still sometimes betrays me. This is not science. It is administration, the discipline of enough." He brushed dust from a plaque with the back of his knuckles. "When the Gregorian reforms stole 10 days, the world did fine. But in some valleys, dawn did not arrive for 13. We had miscounted the mouths, so we added dawns later where no one would know to thank us. A shepherd's nap became a morning. An empty chapel kept vigil for a town. The town woke with a courage it couldn't trace. Administrations keep books, we keep verbs." He set a little brass prayer key into a slot beside a lens. The lens bloomed, revealing a thin golden thread weaving through light, pulling stars, a fraction left, then right. "Pilgrimages," he said. The thread shows the path that insists on existing when a road is deleted from the map. The faithful believe they remember shortcuts. It is simply the tension in the thread. What about erasures? I asked. The days cut, the names scraped into scales. The popes by proxy, how does the sky obey those? The sky does not obey, he said patiently. We do, and when we do not, we discipline the hour. He reached above the lever to a panel with 3 dials labeled Gloria, Credo, Sanctus. He set Credo a notch to the right. The constellations formed a crown, held it a breath, then dissolved. Belief bends things you would prefer stayed straight. This is our level. We lean. There are rooms in which the air encourages you to confess, not to be absolved, but to finish the paperwork. The Starwell is such a room. Why keep me here? I asked. Hunger plain in the question the way fatigue is plain in a soldier's knees. Why put a mouth like mine next to a canal where years slide like coins? He had the courtesy to answer without condescension. Every system needs an edge it is afraid of, he said. Fear measures discipline. A vampire close to a dawn machine is an instrument and an alarm at once. His eyes softened. You can hear what the rest of us only measure. When it breaks, you will know first. The floor thrummed a deeper beat, a long tooth catching somewhere. Aurelio's hand hovered over the lever. There, he said. And for the first time since I had known him, the word carried delight rather than supervision. He turned a wheel the size of a palm, and the light poured itself into a shape whose wrongness made my mouth water. A calendar page with no date, a square of obedient paper that refused to admit to the shape of a day. It shivered as a horse shivers under a fly. A missing century, he said dryly. They call it a hypothesis. Here we call it a budget. He showed me the spend. The canal whispered, You don't hear hours move. You hear what rooms sound like when the hours have agreed to take place elsewhere. The plates warmed. The engraved studs on the stair prickled my palm when I touched 1,701, then 614, then 911. The light that had been a false page became a scroll. The scroll unrolled and rolled itself back. Its hem was stitched with minuscule names: midwives, copyists, boys who carried oil, girls who woke the bells, nobles who hated clocks, harms and helps in the same handwriting. We file this time in pieces, Aurelio said, recovered when needed, like sugar. And who decides when it is needed? My voice sounded like a test I had not signed up to grade. The same people who would have decided without us, he said, as if this were comfort. We prefer to be present, and not sile of life, and not sold. He took my wrist the way one takes a pulse and guided my hand to the rail. Hold, he said. The canal will jump, the tooth will complain. I held. The rail thudded once, like a heart remembering a forgotten stutter. He smiled, delighted. We have unjammed a year, he said. Some parish with a sloppy bookkeeper has been punished enough. What happens above when you move a year below? I asked. What do people feel? Nothing, he said. That is the point. A good instrument makes the world feel like it meant to do that. We walked a circuit. He named and I learned the way a mouth learns a psalm, by mouth. Equinox gate do not open during eclipse unless you intend to reorganize forgiveness. Feast wheel, a zodiac built from martyrdoms, advancing it out of season makes saints arrive in the wrong towns. Mirror choir lenses sing to each other, do not stand between sons who dislike their father. Angel glass, Do not tap. He tapped it. The whole well tightened like a belt on a breath. Always show a device that you are not afraid to disobey it, he said. The holy whip was not there, but its grammar was. He paused at a little shrine I would have missed. A brass plaque the size of a hand, mounted not to be read but to be touched. A familiar lattice pattern framed it like the grill of the confessional upstairs, and the center held a circle of glass veined with frost that did not melt. His knuckles hovered a hair's width above the glass. Dawn is a ration, he said again, softer. This is how we measure the rationers. He touched it. My back blazed with old lashes, as if scars are instruments tuned by particular phrases. On the glass, for a second, the first letter of my old name flowered and vanished. He did not pretend not to see. The booth speaks to this room, he said, and this room answers in a dialect of gears. I opened it, I said, because sometimes confession is a way to aim a question without asking it. I read what I was not meant to read. He looked pleased. Good, he said. Ignorant instruments are dangerous. Now you may be less dangerous. He did not console me. Consolation is counterproductive, where accuracy is a sacrament. We stood a long time without speaking. The constellations shifted. The credo dial quivered and settled. A faint choir from nowhere answered a question no living mouth had admitted to asking. The brass studs winked when footsteps far above crossed a nave. Who taught you this? I asked. Not of him, but of the room. He answered anyway. A man who believed that truth cannot organize itself, he said. He was wrong, I said. It organizes by fear if left alone. He nodded. Hence cages. He let me touch Nicaea. It was like palming a stove someone had sworn was not hot. The letters of the council's name prickled my skin. The well accepted my fingerprints as if cataloging me. Height, weight, appetite, the number of seconds my breath disliked being counted. You are a good barometer, he said, as if he were complimenting a horse. You feel the pressure of corrections. He rested his hand briefly at the small of my back, where the lattice of scars can be counted in good light. We know your limits. I thought of the boy who nearly vanished, of the girl with freckles borrowing the question about locks, of the vampire who had agreed to inventory Dawn's. I thought of the names scraped to scales and the index that pretended to be a mercy. Below, the light drew a grid that matched, approximately, the geography of Roman parishes. Certain squares glowed. What are those? I asked. Places where memory tax is overdue, he said. We will collect at Vespers. We circled further and found a door I had not noticed because it pretended to be wall. It wore no handle. The seam was perfect. The brass studs on the stair counted to it and then away as if embarrassed. Aurelio placed his palm flat against it and said a word in a language that sounded like a scaffold being dismantled. The seam shuddered and relented. The door slid. The room beyond was smaller than the well and larger than a parlor and exactly the size of a decision. In the center on a pedestal sat a box, open to reveal a gear not large, not ornate, a single tooth deliberately shaved. Beside it, coiled like obedience, lay the holy whip. The tooth of October, he said. We use it to teach the canal humility. The carved handle? He touched the whip with reverence he would deny later. You know it. Touch it. I did not want to. Want is not the same as refusal. I lifted the whip. Its handle fit my palm with the intimacy of instruments that have made your body learn a grammar it never approved. The chords were pale and smooth and terrible as memory. The shaved gear looked like a smile, missing a truth. We bring these together only when the canal stalls in the wrong tooth, he said. An emergency measure, like ringing the bell in a room that is not yet listening. Has it stalled lately? I asked. The whip was heavier than it should have been, which is to say, it weighed exactly what it wanted to. Not since you arrived, he said. It behaves better when hunger is in the room. Time itself fears appetite. It knows we can eat it, and it prefers to be spent. He smiled. You steady us. It should have comforted me. It did not. Constellations in rooms like this are cages shaped like promises. I replaced the whip. The leather sighed. And the phantom-time hypothesis? I said. Because men love the smell of scandal even when it is kept under glass. Is it true? He shrugged with genuine boredom. A rumor came close to the truth, he said. Then the rumor's owner grew famous, and fame reshaped the rumor. We neither confirm nor deny. We account. He gestured at the canal. The studs, the brass, the light. We are bookkeepers of mourning. He led me back out and sealed the seam without theatrics. We climbed to the first landing again, and I stood at the rim until my balance became loyal to the well rather than to my feet. Somewhere above, Rome practiced waking. The relic engine's pulse came faint through the stair, like a second heartbeat under a rib. If I pushed you, he said conversationally, you would fall up. I laughed, because sometimes laughter is the only way to refuse a dare without entering a treaty. You do not want me to try, I said. No, he said. We do not waste instruments. He left me to think. He trusted me alone in a room that organizes history. Either he was a fool, or he was right about my limits. I walked the circle twice, a third time, a fourth. Where the studs read tridentine, I paused and placed my ear to a lens. Sometimes light speaks nonsense. Sometimes nonsense makes sense if you give it your face. Through the glass, I heard a woman reciting a tide table in a dialect that would become a language 3 centuries later. I heard a monk shortening a psalm to save candles. I heard the squeak of a mouse writing a calendar in the dust behind an altar, then being corrected by a cat. I heard, beneath it all, the counter beat the older machine, the one that measured excuses. When I straightened, a hairline crack had appeared in one of the crystal lenses across the well. It had not been there. Cracks announce stress, like sermons announce guilt. The angel glass shed a single flake of frost that drifted, not down but sideways, and vanished when the air learned modesty. I put my palm on the rail again and felt the thud that means a jam is about to happen, not happening yet, the way a heart warns a runner that pride enjoys spectators. Aurelio, I called, but my voice did not feel like permission here. I listened harder. The studs at October 10 warmed. The canal sighed. Somewhere between MDCL and MDCLX, a tithe had been dropped and not recorded, and the system wanted to find the day. I did the only thing a dishonest creature can do when it wishes to use honesty as a tool. I prayed, not to be forgiven, to be accurate. Hold, I said to the room, borrowing Aurelio's tone. You are not the only lungs. The canal clicked once, twice. The shaved tooth on the emergency gear remembered itself. The studs cooled. The crack in the lens stopped thinking about becoming plural. I imagined the whip in the pedestal room, clearing its throat and choosing, out of professional courtesy, not to be necessary. The well exhaled. I exhaled. Above, the bells rehearsed the first notes of morning and decided the octave could live with itself. I found Aurelio on the stair, with his hand already outstretched for the lever. "You heard it," he said. He did not bother to turn it into flattery. "Yes," I said. "It wants to stall where it can be seen." He nodded. "Some machines become vain. We ignore that vanity. We starve it. We feed it elsewhere." He adjusted Gloria a hair to the left, and the light over the Roman Quarter softened, the way a scolded child sits up straighter to convince you it was already sitting that way. We climbed. "At the rim," he said, as if offering me a saint's name for pocket use, "you do not belong to anyone's mercy." It should have sounded like an insult. It felt like the first page of a ledger that had mistaken itself for a letter. "No," I said, "but I still belong to morning." He looked pleased, the teacher's pleasure when the pupil invents a sentence the lesson was slyly designed to extract. "Good. Then help us spend it wisely. And master in Spedio's round." We left the well, but the well did not leave me. In the library, the Atlas Bay maps fogged and cleared to the rhythm of my breath. The index room clerk wrote, "Unknown," unknown in a margin where a bishop's name had been expected, and, upon rereading, accepted the improvement. The chair idled like a conscience that knows it will be needed and resents the implication of idleness. Above, a woman in a market paused mid-haggling and felt abruptly that something had been given back to her a minute. An apology, the ability to name her own price, and, without understanding why, laughed. That night I dreamed of doors with no hinges, and books with no spines, and dawns poured from flasks labeled with verbs. I woke with my teeth against my lip because hunger chorused in the pipes when the water came up. I rose without lighting a candle and stood in the corridor that refuses to be measured and pressed my palm to the glass in the booth I had promised not to open again for a night or two. Frost bloomed. The first letter of my old name arrived obedient as a summoned dog. I did not write the second. I bent my head and told the door what the well had told me. That silence is not sacred. It is scheduled. The next days braided themselves into a rope I would later be asked to climb. We tuned the engine to a harvest in a hill town whose priest had miscounted mercy. We advanced a vespers by half a tone so a midwife would arrive before a river decided to rise. We filed an absence for a statue's missing thumb and received a letter the next day from a widow who said her husband had stopped pointing at night. We returned a feast to a parish that had traded it for a festival and found the parish wanted both, and learned with embarrassment that greed wears cassocks as readily as hunger does. In the well we spent an extra dawn on a ward where nurses had forgotten their own names. The ward remembered. The names stuck. In each motion I heard the counterbeat the older arithmetic and felt the room notice that I noticed. On the fourth evening, Aurelio met me at the gentle way, not with the borrowed kindness he uses to instruct, but with a decision. "We will correct the equinox gate tonight," he said. "It is drifted by 2 minutes and a prayer. We will do it with the angel glass awake." I tasted metal that did not yet exist. "With the gate open?" I asked. "You can move birthdays with an equinox gate," he said. "We will not. We will move shadows. Bring your ears." We descended. Men and women in habits of various honesty took their marks on landings. The mirror choir hummed. The feast wheel clicked into a posture of humility. The canal filled its lungs. Aurelio set Sanctus to a notch labeled Mercy. Sister Verena stood opposite with the crystal bell. not to ring but to vibrate. Bells are tuning forks when they are shy. I braced my palms on the rail. "Listen for the tooth," Aurelio said. "When it complains, tell it that you are the worse hunger." I did not ask how to translate such a sentence for brass. I breathed the well's air until I could taste its old salt that never was. The angel glass opened its eyes. Frost scrolled and unscrolled across its face like a liturgy written for instruments. The constellations above the Roman quarter leaned, shadows of towers moving a thumb's width against walls where clocks believed they were alone. The studs at March 20 and September 22 warmed. A hairline crack widened a length of a fingernail and then stopped, not from fear but from manners. The gates slid. The room sighed. Somewhere above ground, a sundial corrected a mistake no one would ever know it had made. Somewhere below ground, I felt the holy whip lift its head in a room I could not see and choose not to be necessary. The tooth complained soft, sharp, like a calf protesting the wean, and I answered in the only language nobody had taught me. I let my hunger speak. Do not dramatize it. I did not bare fangs or bruise a prayer. I simply told the room, with the precise, careful honesty I reserve for the throats I do not wish to harm, that I wanted. I wanted the gate to hold its place. I wanted the canal to accept the equinox's correction. I wanted the angel glass to recall the discipline of ice. The room accepted my want as an instrument, and the tooth, stubborn, convinced of its own nobility, became ashamed. The complaint faded. The studs cooled. The constellations returned to their good behavior, which is to say, their bad behavior resumed on a schedule we could afford. After, when the room had finished approving us by settling back into its hum, Aurelio touched my shoulder with 2 fingers the way a man tests a loaf for readiness. "You have uses," he said. "We will not flatter you by calling them gifts. We will not flatter ourselves by calling this holy," I said. He almost smiled. "Good," he said. "Keep that sentence." He turned to the canal and wound a small crank that advanced a half-day into a parish where the river had become a negotiator. "You will need your strength," he said then, almost as an afterthought, which is how monsters talk before they show you the next cage. The Dawn experiment runs in 3 nights. I pretended at calm. I nodded like a man shown a ledger that will later be used to hand him a bill. He left me on the landing to count my breath. In the brass at my knuckles, I felt the well do what it always does when men announce experiments. It remembered all the previous ones. The hairline crack in the angel glass did not lengthen. The canal did not sulk. The studs at October 10 and October 15 lay quiet, pretending innocence. I put my palm where my name had bloomed on the little frosted shrine and felt a letter rise and then swallow itself. The well had an opinion of me. It was not love, it was curiosity. When I climbed at last to the library, the index clerk had fallen asleep, sitting up with the pen in his fingers and ink drying like gilt on his knuckle. The Atlas Bay maps lay on their bellies like dogs that have seen too much day. The relic engine turned with the calm of work that has been told firmly not to be noticed. In the corridor that refuses to fit the building, the iron beads of the rosary tapped a nervous little rhythm against the doorframe, counting. The glass on the booth hummed as if rehearsing the tone it would need when I next told it the truth. I reached to leave the faintest print and pulled back. Accuracy is a ration too. 3 nights. Enough time to pretend I could sleep. Enough time to ask whether a man like me can be trusted with a morning you cannot see. Enough time to remember that the lash that wrote grammar on my back had not been swung in anger, but in favor of a schedule. I wanted to be many things once. Tonight, I wanted to be useful and disobedient in exactly the proportions this well would respect. Silence, I told the stones softly on my way to the surface, isn't sacred. It's enforced. The stones did what faithful things do when someone reminds them of their long mistakes. They settled, without argument, into a better posture for listening. Above, the bells rehearsed. Below, the canal counted. In between, I walked, a mouth trained to conjugate hunger into instrument, and took my place in a world that had already decided to wake. The night before, a machine is brave. The rooms around it practice forgetting how to cough. The library breathed cleanly. The star well ticked without vanity. The relic engine kept its clergy of reliquaries circulating like planets that had learned the politeness of prayer. I told myself I would sleep, and did not. Instead, I counted the quiets between the bells and found a missing number, and in that number I heard the staircase to the index room whisper my name. The index sits behind a curtain of iron beads that put dents in the air where ordinary curtains would put lace. When you pass through, the beads touch your shoulders with the intimacy of an old teacher's hand and leave little half-moons of cold. The clerk on duty that night was the same man who wrote unknown when truth refused to be scheduled. He had a face like paper that has been erased and written on again by a careful child. His lamp was shaded with a scrap of vellum, too faint to read, but important enough to save. Light bled through the strokes in a script that remembered quills. On the table lay the book, the index proper, bound in softened iron, whose pages turn with the deliberation of a court deciding whether to pronounce a name or swallow it. "We harvest absences," he said without looking up. It is the greeting of his trade. "I've brought a question," I said. "Questions are absences that admit their hunger," he said. "Sit. The chair in the index room shames you into good posture." I placed my hands on the desk's edge and felt the rim's tiny notch marks. The clerk counts by touch when his eyes are busy telling paper what to remember. He slid me a ledger of rejects, entries begun and abandoned, names that resisted erasure the way ivy resists modesty, with persistence and charm, until a storm makes everything honest. "Read," he said. "Ask afterward." The first entry was a saint whose devotion had been inconvenient to a conquest. A midwife, canonized locally by women who owe more to water than to creeds. A new bishop, imported, meticulous, had declared the cult ornamental. The index's protocol was clear. Strike from parish calendar. Remove icon from nave. Reassign feast to Mary of Consolation. Schedule bleed back into lullabies every 9th winter so infants remember being delivered by hands that smell of lavender, not smoke. The last line had been crossed out in a different ink. No bleed back. New bishop's nephew keeps a ledger. The clerk had written beneath, in the tiny martyred handwriting of bureaucrats who know the cost of adjectives, "We will bleed it back anyway." The second entry concerned a pope, by proxy, a signature placed where a man should be to appease a treaty that required a boat and a dawn. The index recorded the substitute like one records a debt forgiven in a tricky season. Grateful, embarrassed, it noted the 7 documents the proxy signed. It noted the locations where those documents were later walled up under frescoes so that truth would have to learn to breathe through paint. A marginal hand, Sister Verena's, recognizable by the way she writes vowels like bells had added, eyeline of St. Andrew adjusted accordingly. The fresco's gaze had been tilted 2 degrees to avert scandal centuries after the scandal had already accepted a pension. The third entry was worse. It was a map filed as a sermon, an old coast penned between Luke and John on glass that fogged into islands when exhaled upon. A siege had been shortened in the parish history to flatter a duke. 47 names of the unresurrected had been scraped to scales. The index recorded each scale, recover on feast of stone masons. Let the sea take a day of calm from the duke's descendants in penance. Return names as wind that rattles shutters without breaking them. A later hand had added, timid but accurate, if shutters break, he will be angry. The clerk had drawn a line through the fear and written on the line itself, let him. The handwriting did not pretend virtue. It was simply tired. You do not subtract, I said, halfway between accusation and thanksgiving. You store, he said. His lamp hissed. Storage with a conscience is called mercy. Storage without is called vanity. What do you call what we do? I asked. He smiled, and the smile made him look less erased. We call it accounting, he said, because everyone despises accountants until a war ends and someone must count the days back into the mouths that were kept from them. He turned a page with the gentleness of a finger that has learned too much strength elsewhere. Tonight, he said, we have a triple. A triple is a cluster of erasures, 3 names, 1 root, scheduled to be removed simultaneously in neighboring parishes for the comfort of a narrative. The notice was stamped in a red ink that stained the vellum like a small wound. Order. Reassign Saint Anselma, the binder patron of questions asked softly, to obscurity. Revise homilies. Withdraw her beads from shop counters. Declare apocryphal. The letter she never wrote to the nun, she never kissed. Reason. Consolidation of devotions under Saint Catherine for administrative clarity. Effective. Dawn. Feast of Saint Nicholas of Myra. Implementation. Choirs will not sing her name. Merchants will forget to restock her medals. Priests will preach on other matters. Mothers will find a different saint when their daughters ask to learn locksmithing. Why? I said, and heard the whine in my own question like a hinge. He shrugged. Locks frighten men who own keys, he said. Also, some archivist with a talent for graphs convinced a council that 10 saints for women who make things is too many for a diocese with so few factories. We will fix it. But meanwhile he tapped the red wound gently. The erasure must be written. I want to hear it, I said. He took me to the audio annex. The room with the headphones and the binder stamped so hard the letters had left bruises. The panel of switches yawned politely. The smell of ozone still carried impatience. The clerk's finger hovered over the shelf tones, a small bank of dials that set the key in which a name is stored. And Selma binds in G, he said. Names of patient skills prefer the alphabet's simplest teeth. He set the needle. Sit. I sat. The leather ears swallowed mine with the insinuating tenderness of tools that know ears intimately. The first sound was the sound of the absence, choosing a mouth. A choir breathing in and not using the breath. A shopkeeper turning a key one last time and not asking why his hand felt briefly younger. A girl swallowing a question she had planned to leave on the priest's doorstep like a foundling. Then the tear, the fabric being removed not from the cloth, but from the ledger. Clean, efficient, proper, There is nothing so dangerous as a well-executed harm. After came the scheduled bleed back, but this time the clerk did not yet lift the lever. He watched my face. He is a scientist of grief. Dawn, feast of Nicholas, he said. That is the time they have chosen to erase. They think gifts distract. But Nicholas boys, oranges. Sailors, he is friendly to questions asked at doors. We will make him complicit. I put the headphones down because I could not trust my ears not to agree with the room. Show me the paper, I said. Not the sound. I want to see the net. He smiled without malice and returned me to the index proper. He opened to the leaf where the entry would be written. He uncapped his pen, ink, black as the part of the night that still remembers the apprenticeship of stars gathered at the nib. Right, I said. And he did. He wrote the order. He wrote the hypocrisy. He wrote the name with a small hesitancy at the A that felt like a bow. He wrote the date. He wrote the parish cluster. Then he wrote, in a margin that barely consented to margins, the counter-order. Bleed back. December 6 inches. Bakeries. Return as flour that refuses to be measured, the same way twice. Return as keys finding their own holes. Return as a bell rung by girls. Who taught you to be disobedient with this much calligraphy? I asked. A woman who built a bridge, he said. She did not sign it. The river signed for her. Our job is to witness. He blotted the entries and blew the page dry, with a breath that remembered ash. Now we wait for the chair. The chair room is an amplifier of decisions. Sometimes it is a thief catcher. Tonight, when we entered, the plate already tasted of storm. Sister Verena stood beside it, with the crystal bell tucked under her arm. Father Aurelio adjusted the dial as if music were a cousin of theology and didn't mind being treated like family. They moved the schedule up, he said dryly. Eager. It is always curious who is eager. He gestured toward the seat. Sit. Name it. I did not sit. You name it, I said. Your voice is the one the room believes when it wants an excuse. He inclined his head, accepting both insult and compliment. He set his palm on the box. Saint Anselma the Binder, he said, as if announcing a guest who had been carefully uninvited. The plate tightened the way skin tightens under a surgeon's hand. Root, 3 parishes, he continued. Rationale, consolidation against craft proliferation. Method, redirection of devotion. Performed by men who do not love locks. He looked at me. Tone? G, I said. He turned the dial. The room replayed the decision. The sound was a coat folded and placed on a chair that would never be sat on again. It was bread left to rise and never baked. It was a rope unbraided back into hemp by a man who has never held a bridge. Underneath, like a scandal humming to itself, while history rehearses its excuses, the older machine counted reasons. I reached for the lever that controls bleed back, and Aurelio's hand stopped mine. Not rough, merely definitive. Not yet, he said. We must witness the harm completely, or the mercy will be decorative. Decorative mercy is still mercy, I said, too sharp. Decorative mercy is branding, he said, and I remembered the whip handle's angel faces and understood his impatience with pretty instruments. We sat in that indecent listening until I could name, by sound alone, which of the 3 parishes had the better choir and which priest had learned to move his mouth without moving his mind. Then Aurelio nodded to the clerk. The clerk pressed the lever. Sister Verena tilted the bell without ringing it. The room adjusted the air's texture the way lace adjusts a window. The bleed back began. You could taste flour. A key slid into a lock in a house where the man had never once asked his wife how many doors she had taught herself to open. A girl lifted a lid on a jar labeled clothespins and found it full of questions, tidy as laundry. A baker mismeasured on purpose and called it a gift. A trio of bells, thin, bright, rebellious, rang from an alley where no belfry could be built. Anselma returned like a habit the body relearns in absence of witnesses. After, the clerk wrote the receipt, resonance lodged, bleed back scheduled annually, adjust if the council learns arithmetic. He closed the index as a man closes a mouth after the last necessary word. His lamp hissed dignity. "You see," he said, "we do not lie to calendars. We instruct them." "And the people?" I asked, more tired than I had any decent right to be. "We instruct them too. With bread, with bells, with chants that isn't." He poured me water. It tasted faintly of iron, the way water tastes in rooms where names have been repaired. "You wish to see control," he said. "This is it. Gentle, unrelenting, fond of its own manners. It keeps the world from drowning in its own weather. It also keeps questions small." He lifted the curtain of beads with his thumb and let them fall. Some nights I prefer drowning. I remembered the vault of instruments, the flasks labeled with verbs. We could flood the city with. "Remember," I said, nearly joking. "We have," he said, "3 times, 2 centuries ago, once last week." "Last week?" he shrugged. "A hospital ward. Names slipped. We did not consult the council." He smiled a small, illegal smile. "They praised us the next day for a miracle in the papers. Paper loves us when it does not recognize its parents." We were interrupted by Brother Matteo, breathless, multiplication tables rattling under his voice like bones in a box. "A vanish in the nave," he said. "Not a boy this time. An old name. The fresco won't recognize itself." We ran. The chapel's blue-painted saints looked politely elsewhere. In the fresco, where a woman once held a basket of tools that a later painter had turned into a basket of fruit, the fruit was beginning to remember being hammers. The woman's eyes, poised by committee to appear demure, had slid a margin toward conspiracy. The plaster flinched. A parishioner, knees on wood, hands in the arrangement grief teaches, whispered a prayer that could serve as a laundry list if time wanted to pretend it didn't hear. "She's leaving," the woman said, without looking up. "The one who knows knots." Verena took her place with the bell. Matteo set his mallet on the stone. I tuned the astrolabe to the wall. Aurelio adjusted the Sanctus dial to local. We worked in the quiet grammar practiced by people who have made peace with tools. The bell vibrated, not to make a sound, but to persuade the wall to be porous. The mallet kissed stone with a chastity that looked like affection. The astrolabe's tiny teeth aligned their dogs and sons until the rim felt the room's pulse. The fresco sighed and permitted its fruit to be tools again for the space of a breath. The woman's eyes moved a second sliver toward the basket she had been meant to carry. The parishioner's prayer laundry list, grief, habit caught. The vanish surrendered its appetite. The name which had leaned toward absence, like a tired man toward a bed, returned to its elbows. After, the parishioner thanked the saint without irony, and the stone with more. "Help me forget," she said to me, under her breath without offense. "Just what I need to, not more. We cannot choose that for you. I said. Then teach me to choose, she said, with the common sense that makes bureaucrats nervous. Verena looked at me, not stern, only exact. Lend her a question, she said. We have enough. We returned to the index to file the recovery and found on the desk an unsigned directive, the kind that pretends to be benevolent by using no names. Increase consolidation of minor devotions in outlying parishes. Standardize hagiographies. Minimize local feast days that encourage trades. Direct emphasis toward universals, martyrs, doctors, soldiers. Retire domestic saints, midweaves, binders, locksmiths, to archives. In the margin, someone had penciled, "Soldiers eat bread. Who bakes?" Then erased it until only the indented ghost of the question remained. Who sent this? I asked. No one, the clerk said. Everyone. He fed the directive to a flat tin box with a slit. The box made a sound like a polite throat clearing. On the far wall, a bell too small to count as a bell made for insects, rang once. Filed under caution, he said. Cross-indexed to insurrections we will not schedule. It is one thing to catalog the machinery of forgetting. It is another to feel it tell you, with kindness, that your hunger is a tool. On my way out, the iron beads counted me as they always do. I paused and pressed my forehead to them. Cold marched carefully into my skin and organized its nerves. What will the Dawn experiment take from me? I asked aloud, though the beads are famous for their refusal to answer. The beads answered, a little. They rattled as if someone had brushed past on the other side, and the other side had a sea. I took the gentle way downward to be sure the Starwell's air hadn't learned to dislike me. It greeted me like a room recognizes a song that has been hummed there often in earnest. The angel glass held its crack in a manner one might even call proud. The Phantom-Time Canal whispered like an animal that has decided, for now, to eat from the hand. I touched the little frosted shrine and watched the first letter of my old name appear and vanish, as if the room were practicing not saying it. Not yet, I told it. Accuracy is a ration. The well approved by not complaining. Back in the library, the Atlas Bay breathed fog onto glass and made secret coasts for me to fail to memorize. The chair slept, offended by the ease with which rooms make pity look like restraint. In the vault of instruments, the flasks labeled Remember and Blur sat shoulder to shoulder like cousins, relieved to be seated by a tactful host. The holy whip, coiled in its bedside shame, radiated a calm that made my back itch, as if the scars were listening through habits. I climbed to the corridor that refuses to fit the building and placed my palm on the booth's glass. Frost bloomed a field, a river, the curve of a letter, then nothing. I will confess, I said softly, if you will be honest. The booth did not pretend to misunderstand. It hummed the tone of an old hinge, grateful for oil, and let the cold take my breath into the shape of a door. I slept at last on a pallet that smelled like paper without ambition. Somewhere a clerk dreamed he was a bell. Somewhere a girl learned, without witnesses, how to pick a lock and left the door ajar for her mother's convenience. Somewhere an old map proposed a shore, and a council voted to deny it until fishermen reported too many fish to be accidents. Somewhere a pope who never existed signed a seventh document with a hand so courteous, even lies envied it. When dawn dared itself across Rome's teeth, I woke with the certainty that sin would not be a drama but a ledger entry. The index of unremembering had taught me what every good predator must learn. That appetite is less dangerous than accounting done by men who never admit they, too, are hungry. The day would ask me to be useful. I would be useful. The day would ask me to be disobedient. I would be disobedient. The day would ask for a confession. I would give it, but not before I wrote, in the margin of the moment, the instruction my hands had memorized in a room that binds absences like books. Bleed it back. They called it an experiment because the word reassures committees. What it was, in the room that taught minutes how to kneel, was a rehearsal for theft performed with excellent posture. Notices went out that did not look like notices. A chalk mark on a stair, a rosary bead turned the wrong way, a candle trimmed to a measure only engineers of mercy could recognize. The library slept with one eye open. The starwell breathed, like a lung that will agree to be borrowed if the borrower remembers the etiquette of breath. The chair woke itself and cleaned its own conscience. I polished my collar as if my throat were a claim that needed to be stamped. I ate nothing. Hunger is an instrument when it has been tuned. At Vespers, Father Aurelio gathered us in the small rotunda, where 3 corridors meet like conspirators. He spoke without script. It was worse than a script. "We will perform the dawn experiment at the gate," he said, as if announcing a wedding that had decided its own guests. Objective: to scour residual narrative from the public hour. We will clean the minute at which rumor becomes history. Sister Verena cradled the crystal bell like a child you don't give a name in case you need to return it. Brother Matteo wore the mallet. With its childish psalms, he always looked most peaceful when given a tool that could break a room and had been told not to. The index clerk carried a ledger bound in the color of old plums. I kept my hands empty so I would have fewer excuses later. "Define scour," I said. Aurelio didn't blink. "Remove unsolicited memory," he said, "from the public hour. Leave only record." The way he said record made it sound like a gentler word for leash. "We will work at first invisible light," he continued, "with the gate held 1 degree open. The canal will carry the surplus minute. The angel glass will watch for disobedience." He looked at me then, the way physicians look at organs they intend to keep but worry about. "You will say when to stop." The well was lit the way a decision is lit, just enough to encourage conviction, not enough to flatter doubt. We took our places by habit, because habit is the choreography of rooms like this. The equinox gate, a pair of crystal leaves veined with frost that likes to think hung above the canal, held shut by gravity and the manners of tone. Aurelio set Gloria to penance. He set Credo a hair to discipline. He left Sanctus on local as if promising we would not move birthdays, only shadows. He placed his palm on a brass script that had forgotten it was prayer. "Begin," he said. "You do not hear a gate begin. You feel air change its politics." The well cooled at the cheekbones. The studs at March 20 and September 22 warmed in sympathy, like hands applauding silently at a lecture. The angel glass opened its indifferent eye and displayed frost in rows that looked like ruled paper. A seam appeared between the crystal leaves, not wider than a blade laid sideways. I heard the canal adjust its appetite. The barely audible sip of a machine that intends to drink a minute without leaving a ring on the table. Sister Verena tilted the bell. Its lip never touched air, but air responded anyway, building the tone you could write on. Brother Matteo brought the mallet down once, without force, and the stone agreed to be persuaded. The index clerk opened his ledger, and the vellum smelled like dried blood and thunder. Scour, Aurelio said. It is not a spectacular command. It is administrative. The canal's whisper became a draw. The well's constellations borrowed light, shivered, and arranged themselves into the floor plan of a memory. A kitchen at dawn, a child's hand on a rung, a rumor about a midwife who used too much lavender, the way a town chooses to remember itself politely. Frost scrolled over the angel glass and dissolved those small, unrecorded truths. Who fetched the water, who hid the letter, who told the lie out of love. The constellations relaxed into the acceptable pattern of a clock. The minute made no protest. Minutes are accustomed to being rinsed. I felt it go like a brief pain receding in bone when someone names it correctly. Again, Aurelio said. We repeated the choreography. The canal drank. The gate breathed in. The glass approved. Again, he said. Again the public hour lost a particular smell. Bread was baked because bread had always been baked. No one remembered the girl with flour on her wrists, teaching the boy to fold in the yeast, because men who grow up to sign paychecks prefer yeast to be a miracle of ovens. Again, Aurelio said, and the tone in the room turned a fraction stern. This is how control overreaches, not with brass bands but with efficiency. 3 minutes scoured. 4. I felt the well's patience bend, not break, only stretch as if to humor a guest staying too long because he tells good stories about his virtue. Frost on the angel glass developed a new grammar, a filament-thin crack that traced a sentence only instruments can read. Enough. The studs at October 10 warmed a little in solidarity with minutes that had once been erased convincingly. My back itched with the lattice where the Holy Whip had written its grammar. Again, Aurelio said, and something under the canal answered with a noise, like a calf refusing weaning. Hold, I said. It came out not as a command but as a recognition, as if the room had spoken first and I had decided to agree out loud. Aurelio nodded, but not all of him nodded. We are within tolerance, he said gently. There is narrative debt. He squared the ledger on the clerk's table with the sort of rectitude that always makes me check whether I still possess my pulse. We will pay it. Who owes? I asked. Everyone, he said, which is the only answer in rooms like this that never invites a follow-up. Resume, he said, and Verena tilted the bell. Matteo kissed the stone. The canal took breath. The gate parted another hair's width, and the star well showed us a city with fewer secrets. The city looked cleaner. Clean is not always good. I tasted metal. My mouth filled with a language that had not been taught in any seminary. Hunger stood up in me and refused furniture. The 5th minute resisted, not loudly. It simply remembered liking itself. A private apology refused to be laundered into public fact. A boy carrying a secret upstairs turned and took 1 step back down. A woman who had promised never to say the name of the road where she had been hurt, heard the road say hers, and chose, very quietly, to keep both names. The frost on the glass drew a curve that looked almost like a human ear. The canal clicked a bad tooth. The gate held and did not admit that it was holding. Apply the tooth of October, Aurelio said, to no one in particular, which is to say, to me. He did not walk to the pedestal room. He did not need to. Rooms like this grow corridors out of your willingness. The seam opened of its own unfussy will. I went in and met the gear, a simple thing, 1 tooth shaved to teach a machine manners. Beside it lay the holy whip, coiled like a sentence that had learned too much about correction to trust adjectives. My palm knew the handle before it touched it. The angels carved there had the expressions of creatures that pity even as they organize you. I lifted it, and my back burned with memory just enough pain to remind the hand of its history. I carried the whip and the gear back into the room where men who love order learn how honest their love is. Proceed, Aurelio said. The canal bucked, not in panic, in pride. Verena did not adjust her face. Matteo relaxed his shoulders in the way that means he is about to be accurate. The clerk set his pen on the ledger the way a surgeon lays out a knife. I took my place by the rail. It was not a stage, it was a witness stand. The angel glass looked at me without blinking. I spoke the only confession I could afford. I will not be forgiven tonight. It is an efficient sentence. It removes bribery from the air. Name the minute, Aurelio said. The clerk whispered it to me, not numbers, but a scene. The breath between injury and oath. The fraction where a person chooses whether to become a story or keep being a person. Here, I said. The well tasted my finger through the rail. The studs near October 15 warmed. The gate ignored me the way polite doors ignore dogs. I raised the holy whip, not as punishment, as instrument. There is a way you swing a lash that does not look like violence. It looks like editing. The cords cut the air. They did not touch flesh. They struck the canal's casing, right where the emergency gear engages when a machine confuses its own nobility for necessity. The sound that followed was not pain. It was release a rope uncoiling correctly after 3 seasons of duty, a joint finding its place, a lock yielding to the proper key. The canal caught. The shaved tooth bit. The gate flinched and opened not wider, but truer, as if acknowledging that the degree it had been forced to perform did not match the degree it had been born to obey. The angel glass developed a second hairline crack, parallel to the first, then sealed both with a lace of frost, so delicate even the frost looked impressed with itself. The constellations in the basin tore and re-knitted not into a clock this time, but into a ledger written in light. The ledger unrolled over us like a sky trained to confess. Names fell not down, but out from where they had been pressed between public record and private rumor. Midwives, copyists, locksmiths, the unresurrected whose sons were taught to remember the plague and not the policy. Girls who opened jars, labeled clothespins, and found questions. They were not ghosts, they were receipts. The well presented them as if asking us whether we still wished to pay. The index clerk whispered the word he uses when paper wins. Witness. His pen moved no flourish, only the fast hand of a man catching rain in a sieve. Sister Verena tilted the bell 1/8 of a degree toward mercy. Matteo struck the stone exactly once at the seam where icon becomes door. Aurelio adjusted credo to a notch labeled accuracy and surprised himself by liking the sound of it. We could have stopped. We should have. We did not. Instruments enjoy competence. Competence is a drug. Again, Aurelio said quietly, not because he was drunk with power, but because successful control believes success wants another. We pressed. The canal took another surplus. The gate tasted obedience and asked for more. The glass offered us grammar, and we accepted syntax without asking if the sentence came with a verb we could afford. The constellations redrafted the city's hour. People above us felt nothing they could name but did actions they would later call intuition. A woman turned back to knock on a neighbor's door before a window fell. A student crossed out the line his teacher had taught him and wrote the one his grandmother had hummed. A bureaucrat held his pen over a signature and decided a treaty could be read correctly the first time. We almost made morning clean. That is when the older machine, the counterbeat that counts excuses, decided we were impolite. The rail under my palm thudded with a sound I had never felt, like a heart that has been polite too long and remembers suddenly it could be loud. The studs at October 10 burned hot as a palm that has held a coal because a doctrine required it. The angel glass unlearned its manners and displayed not frost but steam, a fog that wrote no across itself and then laughed at its own dramatic taste. The canal bit a tooth it did not own, and a ring, thin, awful, honest, traveled the brass and the glass and the bone and told every instrument in the room that control had grown fun and must be interrupted. "Stop," I said, but the word was not the right shape. "Stop," Verena said, and her tone did what mine could not. It bent the room's spine. "Stop," Aurelio said, and in his voice lived all the choirs who had ever practiced until their throats bled. The well considered. Machines do not obey. They choose the behaviors that allow their keepers to keep believing. The canal slowed, but did not return to its decorum. The gate held it true open. The glass cooled apace with the hairline cracks it had nearly decided to enjoy. I lifted the whip again, not to strike the canal, but to name the instrument that had not acknowledged itself. The lash does not carry words. Still, certain motions are alphabets. I inscribed in the air the shape of a letter I had never been taught, and the room answered as if startled to be addressed in its own vernacular. The older machine, a rhythm more patient than any clock, settled into its seat. The ring stopped ringing. The rail stopped telling the story of my bones. We hovered at the lip of a catastrophe so orderly it would have taken a century to notice. Then the well exhaled a sentence. I will spend the rest of my service translating, not purity, proportion. We closed, not like cowards, like people who have learned a ruler knows the exact length of its virtue. Verena let the bell relax in her elbow. Matteo lifted the mallet and looked almost sad. The way a man looks at a door he was getting good at converting into a window. Aurelio set Credo back to cage and let his hand rest a moment. 2 heartbeats, maybe 3 on the notch, called accuracy, the way a man touches the jaw of a child that looks like him but will not carry his name. The gate sealed. The canal learned again how to drink without stain. The angel glass blinked the last of its bad manners away and returned to frost, obedient as a clerk who has finished a poem and remembered his job. Above us, the city felt the shrug of an almost. A woman at a window frowned as if the morning had forgotten to say please. A boy on a step put his hand on a rung and then took it off, not in fear, in order to think. A baker mismeasured and called it art. Somewhere a councilman woke with a headache that would last until he allowed a paragraph he had never liked to pass unchanged. None of them would tell these stories to their priests. The stories would tell themselves to their lungs. In the quiet that follows a room's apology, the index clerk wrote a receipt. Dawn scoured. 4 minutes. 5th, corrected. Ledger, bled. Names, returned as receipts. Canal, dent. Glass, 2 hairlines, sealed. He lifted his pen, looked at the blank below, and did the bravest thing a good clerk can do. He wrote, noted, and stopped. Are we forgiven? I asked. because questions sometimes must humiliate themselves to be useful. Aurelio wiped his hand on his robe as if his palm had sweat, and he wanted to keep the sweat from acquiring symbolic duties. "We are balanced," he said. "Forgiveness is for people." I put the whip back on its table. It sighed, or I did. The gear with the shaved tooth sat beside it like a smile that knows it's not a mouth. The seam in the pedestal room closed with the tired closure of a sentence that has conceded its comma to an editor with better eyesight. I stepped into the rotunda, where the corridors conspire, and felt the building change its posture by a thumb's width. The stones did not approve or disapprove. They did what faithful things do when men finally remember that weather is a policy. They agreed to carry it without flinching. We dispersed as people do after miracles they refuse to name efficiently. Verena returned the bell to its humiliations. Matteo counted chairs in the refectory because numbers comfort hands that have been given the courtesy of restraint. The clerk went back to his iron pages and wrote the letter of a saint so beautifully that even if the name were struck later, the initial would leave a dent in paper. Time would never flatten. Aurelio stayed. He touched the angel glass with 2 fingers, then the rail, then the stud, at October 10. He did not look at me when he spoke. "You did what you were named to do," he said. "Not absolved. Accurate. Accuracy is not mercy. It tastes like iron and keeps until morning." I climbed the gentle way alone. The corridor that refuses to be measured met me with its angle, which is the most honest greeting anyone can offer below the earth. The iron rosary tapped its metronome on the doorframe. The Dawn Confessional waited the way a shoreline waits for a new lighthouse. Skeptical, patient, remembering drownings. I did not open it yet. I wanted the sweat to leave my back before I knelt. I pressed my palm to the glass. Frost bloomed. Not a letter, not a map, a mirror. The booth offered me my face, the one that had learned to wear a collar, the one that had learned to let hunger conjugate itself into instrument, the one that had been struck into grammar. I did not smile. The glass fogged with my breath and wrote on itself the sentence a hinge writes when it remembers it used to be a tree, open. I went to the surface. Rome had decided its morning. The sky wore the ordinary arrogance of light that does not yet know how much administration it cost. Pigeons practiced ownership. Vendors cut bread with knives that had inherited the patience of their grandmother's wrists. A woman asked a question at a door, and the door answered with a story about keys. I walked among them with my collar straight and my mouth closed, because mouths have a history of turning into weapons when they believe they have learned enough. That evening we gathered again, because experiments are never singular. They breed like interpretations. Aurelio read from a short list written in the tidy, unlovely hand that never wastes curves. A just feast wheel 2 clicks for a parish that had mistaken abundance for virtue. Reverse bleed in a school whose headmaster had begun to think questions are the devil's scouts. Deliver a minute to a ward where names slip after midnight as nurses change. At the bottom, on a line that did not admit to being chosen seconds earlier, he wrote, "Confession Dawn." We slept in fragments. Between fragments I visited rooms like old men visit windows. The chair behaved. The index breathed. The Atlas Bay fogged and cleared like a patient rehearsal of rain. I touched the small frosted shrine in the starwell and watched the letter of my old name rise and fall until the room, bored with my superstition, stopped playing along. I went to the vault of instruments and stood in front of the flasks, labeled with verbs, and let them refuse me. I did not drink memory. I did not blur. I did not reverse. I did not witness prematurely. I let the verbs keep their grammar for the hour they had chosen to deny me. When the second night of the experiment came, it came with fewer lectures. Competence becomes quiet. Danger dresses in routine. We aligned the mirror choir. We set Gloria back to penance, and Credo to discipline, and left Sanctus on local, like a promise not to become gods. The gate opened to true open, without complaint. The canal drank without stain. The angel glass blinked with a single hairline crack, like a scar someone has learned not to hide. We took 1 minute from the hour that had tried to become a novel and paid it into a ward whose night shift had eaten its own names. We returned a small song to a parish whose choir had grown embarrassed by exactness. We did no harm that we could count. We may have done harm that will write us later in a boy's jaw when he clenches it at the thought of keys. I accepted that kind of bookkeeping because men like me have learned to respect ledgers written by hands that know how to bleed and not make a scene. On the third night, Aurelio brought the holy whip out before anyone asked. He set it on the rail as if introducing a dignitary who had finally learned to sit through a meeting. "In case," he said. I nodded, polite, unpersuaded. The room smelled like the part of storm that prefers copper. The gate obeyed because obedience is a habit. The canal behaved because it had been flattered recently. The angel glass waited the way a cat waits under a table, a readiness that is not the same as attention. We took the minute the council had scheduled for amnesia, the one meant to scald the mouth of a story that had begun to taste like courage, and we refused to take the second minute they had set aside for branding. The room let us be principled. The hardest rooms will let you be principled for a while. When it ended without fanfare, which is how you know you survived rather than triumphed. We stood in the after listening. The index clerk wrote "noted" again and underlined it once. Verena rapped the bell. Matteo cleaned an imaginary smudge off the mallet with his sleeve. Aurelio put the whip back on its table and looked at his hand for a long time, as if counting the small bones that agree to turn into fists when invited. I returned to the corridor. The iron rosary counted me. The booth hummed. I unlocked it because there are doors that must be opened after a machine has risked caring too much. Inside, the air remembered weather. The glass plate in the kneeler hummed like a surface about to learn a name. I sat, my collar straight, the lattice in my back articulate with healed grammar. I put my mouth to the lattice, the way one puts a mouth to a wound, careful, accurate, despising sentiment. "Bless me," I said, and the booth did not laugh, for I have moved on. The dark on the other side acquired depth like a field-learning wind. The voice that lives there did not pretend to be surprised. "How many?" it asked. "4," I said, and told the truth about the 5th. "Who did you return?" it asked. "Receipts," I said. "Names filed as evidence." "Who did you keep?" it asked. "No one," I said, and then corrected myself because lying in rooms like this makes instruments bored. "We kept the possibility that accuracy can be a sacrament." "And were you forgiven?" the booth asked, performing the courtesy of a script because courtesy keeps men honest when honesty would rather be clever. "We were balanced," I said. "I want to be witnessed." The booth approved with a temperature. The glass plate fogged. The frost wrote my old name and did not erase it. The chain under the floor clicked a small, surprised amen. "Continue," the voice said. And I did, not with my sins, but with the instructions I had learned to write in margins when rooms behaved. Do not confuse cleanliness with health. Do not mistake obedience for discipline. Keep the questions near the bread. If you must strike, strike the tooth, not the flesh. Bleed it back. The booth listened. The room beyond it breathed. The whip in the pedestal room settled like a sentence that has learned its job is not to end men but to end excuses. I closed the door, locked it, and put the key back where even my hand would need to ask permission to find it. Outside, Rome practiced mourning. Vendors shouted prices that had been set by Dawn accountants who would never buy their peaches. Children argued about saints as if the saints were neighbors. A woman tugged a door that had resisted her all week and found that today it preferred to open. I walked past them feeling my uses and my limits at the same time. I did not look at the sun. You do not stare at donors. You use their money. You keep the ledger. You do not let them think they own the hour. That night, before the bells convinced the city it had always intended to sleep, Aurelio stopped me in the rotunda and said a sentence I needed to hear and hated. Tomorrow, he said, we will ask the dawn to confess. He meant the experiment had been rehearsal. He meant the gate could be turned from scouring to speaking. He meant we would no longer pretend to clean. We would interrogate. I laughed once, softly, because sometimes even monsters prefer jokes. What do you think Dawn will say? I asked. He looked at my throat, not like prey, not like rival, like a microphone. It will say what it always says, he answered. Remember, I slept badly and well, which is how men sleep when rooms have decided to trust them. In a dream I held the astrolabe, and it purred like a cat that has forgiven you for the wrong kind of love. In another, I stood under the angel glass and watched Frost write no until the word ran out of letters and turned into yes out of exhaustion. I woke before bells, which is my favorite time to decide I am not a coward. I stood in the corridor that knows my weight and pressed my palm to the booth. Frost bloomed. The mirror returned. It did not offer me my face this time. It offered me yours, the citizens above, the clerks below, the women with keys, the boys with rungs, the men with ledgers, the saints with scales. I touched the glass. It was so cold it learned mercy. I said the sentence I have learned to say when rooms ask for my ambition. I will not be forgiven, I said. I will be accurate. The hinge thanked me in the grammar of oiled wood. The house of minutes straightened its shoulders. The canal counted. The gate listened. The whip slept. The well paid attention. And somewhere, a baker mismeasured on purpose and called it breakfast. I woke in the gray the bells haven't bought yet. The quiet hour when even pigeons forget to rehearse ownership. The air tasted like the edge of a coin sleep's last salary. I didn't dress for spectacle. I buttoned my collar with the deliberate care of a man sealing a letter he refuses to address. The corridor that refuses to be mapped measured me without malice. The rosary of iron tapped its metronome against the doorframe, a patient, almost fond counting. I unlocked the booth because there are conversations a man cannot have, standing up. Inside, the weather had returned. There are rooms where the air learns loyalty. This was one. The lattice was darker than honesty. The glass on the kneeler hummed the way glass hums when it is about to remember your breath. I sat, and the wood accepted my weight with that monkish courtesy a century grants to anyone who still bothers to kneel. I spoke before the room could flatter me with ritual. Bless me, I said, steady as ledger ink, for I have moved Dawn, and I have learned what it costs to keep minutes clean enough to eat. The dark across the grill arranged itself into depth, like a field deciding to grow wind. The voice that lives there is not a man, it is patience given grammar. Confess, it said, not unkindly. So I did. Not the theater of sins, that inventory is the smallest language I know, but the instructions I had learned to write in margins while rooms negotiated weather. I confessed precision. I confessed appetite disciplined, until it became an instrument other men could pretend was holy. I confessed to the kindness I owed to machines, and the suspicion I owed to men who loved them too easily. I confessed to liking the sound of accuracy more than I should. And what do you seek? The voice asked, as if the question were a small door already ajar. Not forgiveness, I said. Witness, silence. Accepted the bargain and placed a chair for it. The glass fogged under my breath. Frost unfurled, slow and confident, into a word the room must have been practicing all night. Continue. I will, I said, and the lattice exhaled, for once, like a person relieved. I began, at the beginning, that wasn't. A boy on a rung, a woman at a door, a ledger that confuses mercy for balance, a well that keeps calendars in cages and feeds them dawn as if rationing a war. I described the relic engine breathing in reliquaries, the index harvesting absences with calligraphy that can make disobedience look like etiquette, the chair which amplifies decisions until they confess their parentage. I named the angel glass and its hairline grammar. I named the canal that drinks, and the gate that learns the shape of obedience, and the tooth that teaches pride to behave. I named the holy whip, and the lattice in my back answered with the small electricity of scars that can read. Why did you stop when you did? The voice asked. Awake now with the courtesy of a craftsman watching another craftsman measure twice. Because the room said a sentence I did not know instruments could say, I answered. Not purity, proportion. And what did you keep? It asked. The possibility that accuracy might be a sacrament, I said. And despite myself, I smiled. Which, in a booth like this, is to risk poetry. Above ground, the city stirred merchants counting peaches, a cart deciding which rut was an honest road, shoes reminding feet of promises. I could hear the world preparing to agree with itself. Below ground, the well ticked its practiced indifference. Between them, I took the breath my mouth demands when it intends to become a tool, and said the line I had written in the margins of rooms like a smuggled creed. Do not confuse cleanliness with health. Do not mistake obedience for discipline. Keep the questions near the bread. If you must strike, strike the tooth, not the flesh. Bleed it back. The booth accepted the catechism as if filing it under use. Frost wrote a circle on the glass, then closed the circle, then opened a seam. The dark behind the lattice widened, not like a threat, like a theater inviting an understudy to step into a role no one was supposed to play, least of all a man with my mouth. You are not finished, it said. I know, I said. I came to finish being silent. The voice laughed once, a careful sound that won't alarm the architecture. Then say what you came to say to those who will learn to listen in bed, with lights dimmed and doubt quieted by fatigue. Say it in a tone that will not wake the house, and will still wake the memory. I turned my head slightly, as men do when they choose a different audience in the same sentence. If you are listening, understand this. I am speaking to you softly, on purpose. Softness is not surrender. It is precision at a lower volume. Here is what I have learned in the rooms where time admits to being managed. The first truth: silence wasn't sacred, it was enforced. Cathedrals are full of quiets laid like carpet to muffle the feet of decisions: who gets named, who gets filed, which feast becomes a factory schedule, which saint becomes a rumor manageable enough to sell as a postcard. If a room has a hush, ask which sentence it swallowed to earn it. The second truth: memory organizes itself if you don't interfere. And when you do interfere, memory does not disappear. It collects in the plumbing. It condenses on the glass. It turns up at dawn, yawning as a story no one remembers learning. This is why the bleedback exists. Mercy is not a river. It is a leak we have agreed to cultivate. The third truth: instruments love competence the way fire loves oxygen. Competence is a drug. You think you are saving the hour. The hour is learning to live without its own muscles. The solution is not abstinence. It is proportion. Do what must be done. And when the machine offers you a second success, teach it the etiquette of enough. The fourth truth: names are tuning forks. When you strike the right one, the room answers with a tone that even a sleeping child can align to. Use this to return what was taken. Use it to stop the theft that calls itself standardization. Use it gently. Precision that humiliates becomes a brand, not a cure. The fifth truth: you are allowed to ask. Ask in a church. Ask in a kitchen. Ask at a gate. Ask at a ledger. Ask with your hands in bread. Ask with your mouth closed if you must. Questions are keys. Locks are not insults. A door opened by question is more loyal than a door opened by force. Say the sixth, the booth insisted, amused as if surprised that confession could be choreography. The sixth truth: you may be hungry and kind at once. Hunger is a lock. Kindness is a key cut to the right depth. When rooms recruit your hunger as an instrument, do not pretend you have become holy. You have become useful. Drink water. Tell the truth. Do not confuse a collar with a cure. The booth approved with temperature. The glass cooled to a friendliness I had not felt since the first night it wrote my old name and refused to erase it. Now, the voice said, tone settling into business. We will be exact. You will give instructions. You will send them out in a manner fit for sleep. I closed my eyes to make the room larger. I pictured the starwell watching like a patient animal. I pictured the index breathing in ink the way a field breathes in rain it has not been promised. I pictured the angel glass with its thin cracks, like the honest laugh lines of instruments that have finally learned comedy. I pictured your room, yes, yours with the dimness chosen on purpose, the glass of water within reach, the phone sulking face down on a table, the fatigue that makes doctrine nervous. Listen, when you wake at 3 with a thought shaped like a missing name, write it. Names written at that hour weigh more in the morning. When you hear a bell in a street with no belfry, follow the sound to the nearest question. Ask it in a tone that won't embarrass the bricks. When you find a map in the back of a book of prayers, do not accuse the book. Pray while walking. If a clerk tells you a saint has been retired, bake bread on that saint's day and use the wrong measure with intent. If your city presents you with a clean hour, ask what narrative debt has been laundered. If the debt is yours, pay in kindness. If it is not, pay in witness. Keep tools modest. A notebook, a pencil, a loaf tin, a bell small enough to hide in the palm, a length of string, a lock you have taken apart and put back together twice. Teach a child to count chairs in a room so they know when chairs have been added and for whom. Teach them to count the quiets between the bells. Teach them to set a glass on a page and breathe to see what map the dew insists upon. Tell them that dawn is a ration and that the rationers are men who should be cherished and corrected in equal portion. Tell them how to strike the tooth, the mechanism, not the flesh when a machine confuses pride for necessity. Continue, the booth said, but the word had softened into permission. If you are a keeper of ledgers, write. Note it only when you can afford to. Otherwise, write the verb the hour requires. Return, uncross. Remember. If you are a singer, keep one carol unfiled. Sing it on a morning not assigned to it. If you are a painter, tilt the eye line back where it belongs. If you are a midwife of stories, keep lavender in your pocket, even when a bishop prefers smoke. If you are a priest, take off your mask long enough to set the dial to accuracy once a season. If you are a vampire, learn the grammar of hunger until rooms stop using it against you. And the call? The voice asked. Because structure matters. You will say it now. I breathed in the booth's weather. I tasted vellum and iron, ash and patience, the faint sweetness of decisions that have agreed to be kinder than their authors. The sentence left my mouth at the pace of a man laying out tools he knows he will need again before night. Do not stop asking questions. The most dangerous thing to them is our memory returning. The glass registered the sentence like frost takes a footprint. The lattice warmed under my hands, a temperature that felt less like absolution and more like a room turning its face toward a window that has remembered how to open. The chain under the floor made its faint nautical noise, the dog on the other end of an invisible leash trotting toward a door it intends to understand. The world above cleared its throat. Again, the voice said, not out of doubt, out of love for repetition, which is how vows become useful. I said it again, the way you say a prayer after you have finally understood what the verbs intend to do to your day. Then I added what the room would not say for itself. Keep the questions gentle. Keep them near the bread. Share them with anyone who wakes afraid. The booth closed its eyes. Yes, certain rooms have eyelids, and the dark beyond the lattice returned to the dignity of being empty. I locked the door with the ordinary key the sacristan trusts. Because ordinary keys are how uprisings begin without uniforms. The iron beads counted me out. The corridor took my weight and made no complaint. I went to the gentle way because today was not for the chair or the index or the vault. Today was for the surface. Rome received me with its usual arrogance of light. Vendors shouted truth in prices better than I have ever managed from a pulpit. A girl with flour on her wrist closed her fist around a bell you could hide under a sleeve and did not ring it. She let it vibrate until a door reconsidered its hinge. A boy with a rung under his palm climbed down and back up, because sometimes rehearsal is the bravest act you can offer a morning. A baker mismeasured as a form of devotion. A clerk at his desk drew a small circle in his margin and wrote inside it a name he had not been allowed to type. Somewhere, a saint that had been filed under domestic cleared her throat, and a locksmith's shop found itself with a line stretching into a street that had believed itself too modern for such cues. I walked past without sermon. The rule in cities is simple. Do not take credit for the hour you helped save if you intend to save another. I bought an orange from a man who believes oranges are the most honest fruit because they do not hide their scars. I peeled it with the slow reverence of a monk turning pages. The peel came off in one ribbon. I pocketed the ribbon because some days you need proof you can do a thing. Gently, by vespers, I stood once more at the mouth of the star well. I did not descend. I placed my palm on the stud engraved October 10, the coal that teaches doctrine how hot it can be without earning pity. The brass was cool. It approved of how the day had chosen to spend itself. The angel glass held its thin cracks, like saints hold wrinkles without apology. In the library, the index clerk wrote "noted" where noted would do, and "return" where noted would have been cowardice. Sister Verena polished the lip of the crystal bell with a cloth that smelled of oranges and stubbornness. Brother Matteo counted chairs, miscounted once on purpose, smiled, and corrected himself, because discipline is not a leash. It is a dance step. Father Aurelio found me the way weather finds windows. He stood at my side without theater and gave me the kind of news men like him consider worth their breath. "We will suspend scouring for a season," he said. "We will bleed back where the debt is oldest. We will tune for harvests and leave kitchens alone." He looked younger, which is to say heavier, with a kind of honesty that respects what it weighs. "We will ask before we touch." "It won't last," I said, because pessimism is one of the shapes accuracy sometimes wears to keep from flattering saints. "Nothing does," he said. "That is why the bell was invented, to remind men who forget on schedule." He touched the rail with 2 fingers. "Your confession did its job," he added, like a craftsman complimenting a tool that has learned not to scream about its purpose. Night assembled itself, meticulous as an accountant, fussy as a priest with candles, kind as a mother hiding a key under a mat. I returned to the corridor that refuses to be measured. The iron rosary did not count me in. It rested, satisfied, like an abacus after a market day that didn't cheat. I did not open the booth. I did not need to. Confession had decided to live in the street for a while, where its grammar improves. If you are still listening, on a train, in a room with curtains, in a bed that has negotiated better terms with your back than last year. Here is the last thing, the handover, the torch. You will be told that stories are bedtime and facts are daylight. It is a useful lie for men who put their names on buildings. The truth is simpler and therefore harder. Stories are how daylight learns its manners. When you feel one trying to leave you, when the hour is too clean, when the saint is too quiet, when the ledger refuses a verb, do what we do below the basilica with less brass and more bread. Ask, write, ring gently. Return. Do not stop asking questions. The most dangerous thing to them is our memory returning. And when it does, when a name you were not supposed to keep rises like frost on ordinary glass, say it aloud, even if your room is empty, especially if it is. Say it as though the door you have never been allowed to open is listening. It probably is. Then sleep. Sleep is an archive, too. Let it file the day where it can be reached. By morning, when the bells bargain with your street for the price of light, offer the difference in witness. It is a small coin. It buys everything worth keeping. I was a priest once. I am something else now, older than their clocks, humbler than their ledgers, honest in my hunger because I have learned its grammar. I will keep watch where the minutes are stored. You keep watch where the bread is. We will meet at dawn, not to be forgiven, but to be accurate.